Good morning, everyone, on-site and online delegates. How are you? Hope you were able to submit that manuscript yesterday to +1. Thank you so much for coming around. Today is the second and the last day for this workshop. And it's exciting to note that a lot of people that were here yesterday actually confessed that it's a worthwhile workshop. And it has helped a lot in motivating them to do further. So thanks for being here this morning. I'm sure you are going to also get into more details of what we were talking about yesterday, the practical aspect, which is quite exciting. But before we start, because we're going to have an online presentation for one of the teams, permit me to say a big thank you from the Faculty of Health Sciences. They have sent their regards. Most of them are not able to be here, especially the management team, but I trust that you will be duly updated. The fact that they are excited that you are here today. So thank you so much for factoring this in once again. And a big thanks to Prof. Mark and Mr. M. I like saying Mr. M. So it's exciting to note that we are not just going to have this as one-off. We are sure that there will be sustainability in this relationship, and we are hoping that we will take it further. So we see more of Prof. Angel and Dr. M as we go along. So thank you so much, friends, and please let's welcome Prof. to the panel.
Good morning, and thanks, Paula, and it's great to be here. I'm still happy to be in PE. I say you've got a very nice feel. The fact that you can get to work so quickly and there's no traffic, and that's my average drive is about 40 minutes, 45 minutes. I catch up on all my calls then. with a car phone. But yeah, so it's really nice to be here. So maybe from yesterday, are there any burning questions, any clarifications that we should think about during our talks today? Nothing. I had one question already, but that's already covered in my slides, so thankfully I don't have to modify anything. Okay, so today we're going to really build on yesterday. I hope that you understand the importance of a good research question, and that from that research question you understand the importance of the definitions and the use of the keywords. And again, it's never a bad thing to just have a page of definitions, even in your protocol, so that everybody knows exactly what you mean when you talk about a particular diagnosis or a particular method of something or a guideline, so that it's very clear. So you understand the importance of that and how that then feeds in to finding information. And we understand that there's lots of information out there, and the trick is to try and really have a targeted search flowing from your targeted keywords, flowing from a clear question. And so today we are going to talk about what do you do once you have all those 6,000 articles, hopefully not as many, but what do we do from that point forward? And in the old days, you can appreciate that we would have a list of all the papers that you found in Excel, and you would painfully go through those. And fortunately, there are lots of tools today that make life very easy. One of those tools is a program, a platform called Covidence, which some of you may have heard about. Anybody heard about Covidence? So Covidence is it's an online tool that allows multi-users from different locations to enter the tool, enter that platform. And basically you dump all your search results in there, and it's a bit of AI in it, and you are able to then do your article management in Covidence. So you can put in keywords, and you can put in exclusion keywords. And so it helps you to go very quickly. So for example, if you know you're looking for cohort studies and you're not interested in case series, you'll put in the keyword case series and it will then, as an exclusion term, and it will highlight them all in red or a color of choice, and then you are able to exclude those immediately. So it's all about trying to wade through the 2,000 articles that you found in a quick and efficient manner. Competence, unfortunately, requires a subscription and a cost. And so there's an alternative to that called Rayyan, Rayyan, and that's freely available to a point. When you want advanced features, you have to pay a fee. But for our purposes, with 2 or 3 people working on a project systematically, it works very nicely. And that is the presentation we now get to have from Lorenzo Benny, who's a research technologist at the Cochrane. And he's going to share an overview of Rayyan with an example of a systematic review that he's doing, or we are doing, with an environmental health officer on workplace muscular disorders. So you'll hear a little bit about that, and hopefully that will open up that portal for you. And then after that, Eddie will then talk about data extraction. So what you do once you've got your finalized list, and I will then go through the meta-analysis. How do we make sense of the numbers going from there? The qualitative people at this point, it's slightly a bit of a departure for you, but it won't be a bad thing that you get to understand meta-analysis and the thinking. I will also look at what heterogeneity is all about and how do we deal with it, and 1 or 2 other things, yeah? And also how we critically appraise our studies, very importantly. Okay, so Benny, just please confirm that you're online, because otherwise I'd have to do your lecture. If you can unmute yourself, Lorenzo.
Oh, yes, I'm online, Prof.
Oh, very nice. Are you going to show us your photo?
No, Prof. I don't want people to fall in love with me.
You got an idea work with people. Okay, Baby, you are able to share your online. Maybe just speak a little bit louder, and over to you, brother. Thank you.
Okay, can everyone see my screen?
Yes.
It's not in presenter mode, though.
Are we good?
Perfect.
Okay. Good morning, everyone. As Prof said, I will be presenting about article management using Rayyan. Okay, so I'm just going to start off because it's going to be a quick overview. So as you guys have learned by now that systematic review has various processes. So by now, you've probably formulated your research question and you've developed your protocol, and then you also did your database search, and yeah, you will probably find a lot of articles, and now you are ready for data extraction. However, the reality is that you will be sitting with numerous articles that you've searched in various databases. So you will probably be looking at more than, as for example, yesterday said with HIV studies, 10,000 articles. And you have to filter through all of these articles because you want to answer your predetermined question, and that you must do by looking at your inclusion and exclusion criteria and a lot of other things. However, this is a time-consuming process, but very important because you need to keep track of your decisions for your Prisma flow diagram, and you also don't want to be in a rush. So you want to work accurately and efficiently. So Rayan fortunately provides you a solution to do all of these things. So why would you want to choose Rayan? So Rayan is very user friendly and it's also intuitive in use. So you can navigate Rayan quite easily. So you won't know or you'll actually know where and when to click, etc. It's also free but you can have a subscription for additional features and you can invite collaborators because as you heard yesterday, reducing bias is a focal point in systematic review writing. So you always want to have one, two or more people um, filtering the articles or screening the articles with you. So Ryan also provides you to do this in a quality and unbiased way because why it predicts inclusion and an exclusion criteria. It also highlights your articles by highlighting the words, certain words in green and yellow, and also you can add reasons as to why you want to include or exclude articles. So to lay groundwork for the presentation, we in this review will be looking at the prevalence of work-related musculoskeletal disorders in low and middle income countries. And we search PubMed, Google Scholar, and Scopus. And then like the studies that we want to include for the study will be cross-sectional case control and cohort studies. So what I've done is I divided using Rayan in 3 phases. So the first phase of using Rayan is you have to organize and plan. So first you create your profile, which is quite easy. And then you want to deduplicate because as I've previously mentioned, you will be searching a lot of databases and some of these articles you might find in Scopus and then as well as PubMed. So you want to deduplicate it to make sure that you don't read or filter through the same article twice. And then you want to set your inclusion and exclusion criteria. So this will basically help you navigate through this filtering process because Ryan will highlight it either green for including words that you want to include in your article, in your systematic review, or red for words that you don't want. For example, in this case, we are looking at musculoskeletal disorder. So words like TB and HIV, Ryan will highlight red, and words like work-related musculoskeletal, Ryan will highlight green. So then the second phase of using Ryan, so you prepared everything, is your execution phase. So yeah, you at least want 2 reviewers to do this because we are trying to reduce bias. And then you want to do it blindly. So you want to put the blind option on Ryan on so that the one reviewer can't see what the other reviewer is doing. And then it is the screening of the abstract and the title. So you don't do a full screen, you just screen the abstract and the title for your inclusion and exclusion criteria. And then the final stage of using Ryan is where you resolve the conflict between you and the other reviewer. Because you might not, while you're doing the abstract screening, come to the same conclusion. For example, the one reviewer might feel like the article should be included for X reason, and then the other reviewer might feel like the article should be included for X reason, and then you guys must talk about it and resolve the conflict. And after you've resolved your conflict in the final stage, you basically then want to do a full screen. So all the articles that you couldn't decide on using or whether you want it included and excluded, during this phase, you will read the full article and then decide on that reasons whether you want to include the article or exclude the article based on your inclusion and exclusion criteria. And then lastly, you want to export the results and create a Prisma flow. So let's just have a closer look at as planning and organizing. So to open, so we all know that you must have an account when you want to use certain platforms. So in Ryan, you open account by clicking on all reviews, and then you open a new review. You fill in all your information that you need, and then you upload all the citations that you downloaded from your multiple databases. And why is this thing not? Wait, I'm still. I'm just having issues with. Okay, I'm back. Sorry about that. So then, as I mentioned, now it's you during your planning and organizing phase, you want to deduplicate the articles. So as you see in the red box, there is a possibility that there's 24 articles that is duplicated. So that means 24 articles might be similar. So you want to reduce it and take it out or keep some of them or delete some of them. So how you do it is by resolving the duplicates, and in Ryan it will tell you, as you see, there's a 48% duplicate. Ryan basically tells you that there's a 48% chance or similarity under there in with other articles. So you can either delete it or not delete it and keep it depending on what you find. And then Ryan also tells you whether you want to how many articles you deleted, as you see, and how many is not duplicates, and how many you've resolved so far. So for me, setting an inclusion and exclusion criteria helps a lot because it will help you to filtering through all these articles. So you can add new keywords because Ryan will basically generate keywords, and you can also add your own keywords. So as you see for the inclusion criteria, workers appears 1,041 times in all of the articles. So if you want to, for example, today just include articles, you can click on an array of inclusion words and then read through it. And then similarly for the exclusion criteria, you can add your own. As you see, for we wanted cross-sectional studies, so obviously you'd want to delete cross-sectional in this case we're gonna delete cross-sectional. So you must just be aware of those kind of things as well. This is just to show when you click on your exclusion and exclusion and inclusion words, Ryan will highlight the included words as green, and then the excluded words it will highlight in red. It just makes the filtering process very easy. And now for your execution phase. Does you want to have the blind on? Because as I previously mentioned, sometimes when you work with people, they might have more knowledge than you on a certain topic. However, you want to reduce bias. So you are, for example, if I have to work with Eddie on a systematic review, who's an expert in vaccinations, and I see Eddie included in article, and I feel like I need to exclude the article, I will eventually include it because Eddie included it, and I feel like Eddie knows more, etc. So you want to have the blind on so that Eddie can see my decisions and I can see Eddie's decisions. So this is a very important step. You need to have the blind on. So if you want to start doing the abstract and title screening, in the red box you can see Ryan will basically tell you in the undecided row how many articles have not been decided on, how many articles you said maybe on, how many articles you included and how many articles you excluded. So how you exclude the articles is basically by clicking on the article, and then you can either click on include or you can use I. You can click on maybe if you're not sure, and then you can click on M, or exclude, you can click on exclude or E. Prof taught me this golden rule that if you don't know or are unsure about an article, always include it, because you can always exclude it later. That's the golden tip, guys. Trust me. And then in Ryan, you can also add reasons as to why you don't want a specific article. And you will find this very useful, especially for table 2 or for your Prisma chart, where, for example, you can say the specific one, has the wrong outcome, even though, as you can see, it is green. However, the outcome or the population is wrong. And it will help you keep track of your decisions. And then also progress. As you can see, the pie chart, Ryan can basically tell you, okay, so 80% of the articles has been included and excluded and 17 included, and it will also tell you how many maybes, etc. So then the finalizing stage. So you've done the abstract screening, you've done all of those things, and now you want to resolve the conflicts. As I previously mentioned, the pie chart will basically tell you how many conflicts there is as well. So to resolve the conflicts, you can switch the blind off now, because you want to see which articles you disagreed on, and which articles, if you want to know how many you agreed on. So for this, you must go to your inclusion criteria. You click on conflict, and then Ryan will show all the conflicts that there was. So in this case, as you can see, Kirsten excluded most of these 3 articles, and I included them. Eventually, I had to exclude them as well, because she was the expert here. But at least the process was unbiased. Okay, and then while you resolve your conflict, you can also give reasons as to why it was decided that you want to include the articles or exclude it. So now you've basically excluded and included most of the articles, and you want to do a full text screening. Because if you, like in my experience, if you get 4,000 articles, you filter down to title and abstract screening. So you're sitting with probably 1,000 or 400 articles, which is still a lot. And there's probably some things that you've missed. So now you want to read the full article. So using Rayan, you can use it by way of 2 reasons or 2 methods. And you want to do this, you want to document most of the steps during this phase, because you will use it for table 2 of your excluded studies. So the first way you can do it is by uploading an article to Rayan, and then use your inclusion and exclusion criteria to include and exclude articles. So how you do that? You click on included articles. You see 400. That's a lot of articles to read. And then you upload it, the PDF, and you will see that it will show you that it's been uploaded. And for this, you want to have the blind on again, because you're screening again. You don't want the other collaborator or reviewer to see your decisions. And then you exclude, include, and maybe these articles. Here, you particularly want to add reasons as to why you want to include or why you excluded these articles or certain articles. And again, Ryan gives you a lot of options, but also you can add your own options. The second way of how you can do it is by reading the full article in Adobe, and then you record the data in Ryan, because importantly, you need a Prisma flow. So something needs to keep track of your decisions. So this is basically how you do it. It's a nice illustration. And then you include and you exclude using the tabs after you've read the article, and you add your reasons. You label the articles to keep track. So if you have another meeting or there's some confusion, you can just go back and you'll see, okay, article was excluded for X reason, labels, etc. So that is basically it. Planning phase, execution phase, blind, always on. Finally, resolve your conflict in peace and blind off. But when you screen again, full text, blind off. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for being.
Thanks, Benny. If you didn't hear it, you got an applause. I was wondering if there are any questions for Benny. Of course, this is an overview, and there are YouTube links and other resources available. Benny, maybe you can put those in the chat, the link to the YouTube tutorial. With all of these kinds of workshops, as you can imagine, the Rayan tutorial would be a whole session on its own. And what we're really trying to do is to do the flyby, give you an overview of what's there and what we consider to be essential tools that one would need. And as Paula mentioned, that if we continue on this journey and folks are engaged in doing reviews, then we can drill down a little bit more. And Benny generally is the person that will support. He'll set up the Rayan, add all the users, do the blinding, and will then support folks who are doing these reviews. Paula?
Yeah, I have a question. Just before the question.
I wonder if you don't mind just taking the mic.
Just before the question, Prof, just wanted to say it's not if we continue, it's when we continue this journey. And Prof, I just wanted to ask our presenter, if you go to the Run software, you see say something like import from Mendeley. So I'm just wondering if folks or colleagues are using other reference managers like EndNotes, does it actually also allow them to import from such?
Yeah. Oh, sorry. Is this one? Yeah, press a button. Yeah. Yeah, so thanks for that question. Basically, Benny, if you don't mind, I'll answer it for you. Basically, Rayhan can import any reference output format. So from PubMed, it will import the PubMed. When you've done your search and you do an export, it will export it as a NCIB file, I think it's called, or an NBIB, and Rayhan will pull those in. It will pull in Mendeley, it will pull in some of those other older reference manager kind of programs. It will be able to pull any one of those in. I think it's a .ris file that will easily go in to Rayhan. As Benny mentioned, that it really has that power also to enable you to construct your Prisma chart, which says, articles that were excluded and why they were excluded, because that's what you would need in your systematic review. In my example that I gave yesterday was a twin study, and I included that one study that the gentleman mentioned, and I excluded it, it would have gone into my table of excluded studies up front. So there would have been no sort of no sort of disillusionment on his part that they never considered me, kind of thing. But yeah, I'll show you an example of a thesis with all the tables, and then you'll be able to see what we mean by that, you know, the tables of explicit studies. Yeah, there's a question.
Yes. Just a question regarding the inclusion and exclusion criteria. Is that linked to your keywords?
Exactly. So, you know, you're starting to see the full size circle now. Why it's so important that those first stages are done properly, the first steps. Because by the time you get to this stage of excluding articles, your life is so much easier. There's nothing worse than reading an article and making a decision there with unclear sort of criteria in your mind. The beauty of doing the protocol is that it sets in stone what you're going to do from there onwards. And so then it really doesn't matter. There's no, uncertainty. You look for those keywords or for inclusion or the keywords for exclusion. And you don't have to make any excuses. It's clear, it's in the protocol, that's what you decided with legitimate reasons. And this is why I said yesterday that even although doing a protocol seems like a lot of time, I can assure you later on, you're going to be so glad you did. In the old days, you'll probably remember when you had printouts of articles, photocopies of articles, and you're sitting with a highlighter with different colors meaning different things. And you can't remember, does the green mean, include this or what it refers to, and it's just a complete nightmare. And of course, the wind blows and all the papers fly on the floor, and you don't know which article must go where. What this is doing is circumventing all those issues. It really just gives you a clear path to navigate here. So I cannot stress how important the protocol, inclusion criteria, etc. are. So thanks for that question. Are there any on the chats? Okay, great. So now moving along, sort of, it's like a bicycle with lots of spokes, and we're going to the next spoke. Eventually we'll come back to the beginning. Moving along now, you've done your question, inclusion, exclusion criteria. You've gone through all your titles and your abstracts. You've decided independently what must be included. And now you're at the stage where you've got your final articles for inclusion. And now you need to know what to do with those. Thanks. We hand over to Dr. Eddie. Yeah, because of the you on that. On this. Thank you so much, Paul. Good morning, colleagues. I think yesterday we had a colleague, I just remember now, I see now on the online, I don't know if it was me, because he mentioned something on the chat like he was saying immunization and vaccination is not the same thing, and it was the truth. However, because we are addressing the issue of like how other countries they define immunization, how they write
So it was not about like defining like it's the same thing. I think if you are online, just indicate that you are okay with it. So we're not saying immunization process is the same, but it's how the authors write their articles, immunization or vaccination. So yeah, I think thank you again, Prof. and colleagues. So I'll be taking you through the extraction. Firstly, why does it go up and down?
Click on the presentation and you use the arrows.
Okay.
And I can use the copy.
So as mandated by SMRC process, because I'm not sure if she's part of the presentation here, so it will be weak for not talking about this. So SMRC, they're acknowledging the past and the correction that needs to be done. So before I can carry on, I just want to take you guys, the colleagues on this picture, because what we are going to be talking about today, has got something to do with this picture. Just for a minute or two, there are things that you can see on that picture the other person cannot see. So just give me a minute to just go through that picture and see, and let us know what did you see there. There's so many things there, Dr. Zulu.
Someone says very
But that one's not going for me because I really wanted to send to someone specifically with that. So ladies and gentlemen, what I see on the picture. By the way, your name is Elmar, isn't it? Merlin, yeah. Yes, today we just want to start with you. So we're asking the colleagues here about the picture. What is it that you're seeing there?
We can see two people. Looks like a boy and a girl. They're in the ocean. Maybe there's a sea. A tree.
Okay. Someone else? You can just use the mic because I think for the benefit of those ones online. What I see?
A baby.
A baby? Dr. Zulu, what I see? A couple. I don't know if it's a couple, but there are two people. What I see? What I see?
see a couple begin to the future and wanting to be in the other city, and I also see a baby.
A baby. Who else did you see the baby? You did see the baby. You did see the baby. Yeah. So some of you have seen the baby, but some of you didn't see the baby. So what we'll be talking about today is something to do with you are looking at the same thing, but you see things differently. And let me just take you further. And I have to agree, even myself, I've seen this, because one of my colleagues used this picture to explain. I'm not sure if you have seen this. Because she kept on telling me, even today, I can't see if there is an older woman there. She said there's an older woman. There is one.
Yeah.
Okay, let me just correct. Where is the older woman? Is it next to a couple or? Did you see the older woman? You don't see the older woman. Prof, you see the older woman? Prof?
It's not a picture you showed us just now.
Yeah, but in this one, there's an old.
In this one, I just want to see if there's an older woman.
Like they listen.
Yeah, you see. So, what?
There's a rabbit.
The rabbit case. So, colleagues, the reason I'm showing you this picture and wanting to know from you what did you see is because when it comes to data extraction, you are going through the same manuscript or the same study, but because it's conducted by two reviewers, but one reviewer is going to be seeing something that the other reviewer is not is not wants to see. And that's when we need to the third reviewer. So you see now we didn't see the baby bladder, didn't see the older woman. Thank you so much for that small exercise. So is that? You didn't see the older woman, but do you see the older?
Very strict.
So
what you just mentioned using that as what happens when that person sees a refuge for the beating a couple and the dead person sees a refuge. So they're independent.
So that's why now you go back to what Prof was talking about, the protocol. So you mentioned that what are we going to see? I hope I answered you. Yeah. So thank you. So as Prof mentioned that you have already identified the studies, so the process now is for you to extract the evidence that you want. And you're gonna, as you were asking, so you are going to be using the PICO to extract that evidence. You have formulated your question around the PICO and your protocol is already been there. So you have identified the study that you're going to be including, and you have a good idea of what information needs to be extracted on the study. So you have to, in order for you to extract the information, okay, let me just this. So this is the process. It's also mentioned on the checklist. Checklist and item in the Prisma checklist. It is on item number 9. So it specifies that's where you specify the method used to collect data from the reports or from the studies, including how many reviewers collected data. This is the process. Whether they work independently. Remember, we mentioned that this process you need to work with another person or 2 people. And if appropriate, details of automation tools used in the process. So what is this data expression process? The process can be difficult and can be time consuming. So it depends on the type of the study that you are doing. Let's say the article is got 3 pages. It's very simple. You can just, it's going to be easy for you. But if the article is very long, remember now we are no longer dealing with the abstract. You are dealing with the full text. So you're going to read for the information. I don't know if the AI is going to be helping people as they always do these days in order for you to get the information that you are looking for quickly and easily. As I mentioned before, you will be looking for another person to work with because you're going to be doing the extraction process independently. And as always, that person is needed for this obvious reason, sort out the discrepancies. So in order for you to extract relevant information, you need a tool. That tool is going to be a data extraction form. So the data extraction form, as mentioned earlier, it allows you to extract data from the internet in a systematic and efficient manner. And since you are using the form, because this is a form that you already is there, so it's going to be analyzed easily, because there will be no need for you guys to go back to every time you are looking for the information, go back to the study itself. So now the extraction form is there for you, it has got every information that you need. Even if you want to sort any discrepancies with your other author who was doing the extraction, you just go to the extraction form to say, okay, but we agreed on this and this, here's the information. So there's no need for you to go through the pages of the article that we included. So what do you do first? You are going to design and you highlight that extraction forms to see if it does the form extract the specific information that you are looking for. And I must also emphasize that there's no specific form for all studies. You design the form based on what you are looking for. So if you are designing it for sure, you'll be highlighting it to see if it's is getting all the information that you need for your review. So what type of information you need on this extraction form? For general information, for sure, just there. And you'll be having eligibility criteria, the study characteristics. So these are the study characteristics of the studies that you have included, not your review. The methodological quality, how was that study done? What is the mission on the methodology? Because remember, as I mentioned, there will be no need for you to go back to the study itself, a grammar study every time you want to see information. So that data extraction form, from now on, it will become your asset. You will be having it next to you every time. And the interventions and outcomes mentioned on that study, for sure, all of us want the results. What did they find from the primary study? And when we talk about additional notes, is the information that you will be needing whenever you are completing or writing your review. Any information that you think is going to be interesting, because remember when you write a review, there will be a time when you have to do discussion part. So did you find something that was mentioned on the primary study? So you just extract that information and add it on the day. And remember, I think for people to still doing the paperwork or doing the.
Depends, but most people are now doing online. Some kind of Google Sheet or something.
Yes, but the Google Sheet will give you a space to put any information that you need. Even if it's a diagram that you also extract that type of thing, you put that on the form. Because for you, as I mentioned before, there will be no need for you to go back to the primary studies. So other general information that you will be using there from the studies, it will be title of for sure the title of the review. Let's say Prof mentioned earlier, we are dealing with many reviews. So in order for you to work nicely, you'll have to write or to indicate that which review is this, and have its ID, who extracted it, who was doing the extraction. Remember, you are dealing with the two reviewers. The date of extraction is very important also. And the study ID is the identification of the primary study that you have selected. And for sure, you'll be having the title, authors, publication details of the study. Like the authors, maybe you can just write the first name of the author that you gain and the title. So we come to on that form also, you might have, if you decide to have the criteria, that's where you'll be using the study design, which is like a PICO type of information, because I can see that PIO, but there was no study design. So this study means you can set that in the protocol. I must also emphasize the colleagues, because some people, they use extraction form before they can extract data. If you've got enough time to do those, maybe you've got only 5 studies, you want to see if they really qualify to become part of the review. So that's going to happen. You're going to be using the study design. If you say you are going to do the randomized controlled trials, the participants, pregnant women, intervention, vaccination, or you talk about the issue of reminders, SMSs, and the outcomes, vaccination outcome. So, but I have to also emphasize here that when you exclude the study, you must always have a reason, because when you write the systemic review, there is a what do you call that? A Prisma chart where you have to indicate how many studies did you identify, how many were duplicates, and how many did you exclude. You must also give the reasons for the exclusion of the studies. So when we come to the study characteristics, for sure you will have to write where the study was, which country did the study come from, and the setting, the urban, rural, or was it from the hospital, clinic, or type of information, that type of information. The participant, that's where you give the age, the gender, socioeconomic status of the. And remember, you can extract any information that you need for that participant, because as I indicated, there's no need for you to go back and look at your 100 studies that you have included. So one thing that also that I need to mention, the missing data. It doesn't mean that it's not a missing data because you didn't extract the data. It's because the study didn't specify that information. So when it comes to the methodology, I think the gentleman here is very good because we're talking about RCT and consignment and biasness. You will be collecting or extracting the information that has been mentioned by the primary study around the allocation sequences, consignment of allocation sequence. If they do the blinding, so you'll be extracting that information, all the information, and lots to follow up, which may result in artificial bias. So as I indicated before, you can collect as much information as possible. There's no limit. And also when it comes to the intervention, let's say we are talking about the drugs, you will be collecting how many days did the drug be given, how was the role of the drug or the vaccine, and also the condition of control and comparison. Every information that was given by the primary study, you have to take that down and follow up the duration, or what is the duration of the follow-up? How did they follow up the participant? Did you have any withdrawals? And then that's when later you will come to the outcomes. What did the study say about the primary and secondary definition of the outcomes? So you extract the whole information around the outcomes. Talking about the study results, I've seen Prof. Angel's extraction form. The study result is so open, so big section. So because that's where you're going to put any result that has been mentioned by the authors. So any graph that they put there that you think it might be. So as I put it here, as much as possible, you collect anything that you think is going to be needed for you to complete your review. And talking about the additional notes, as I mentioned earlier, the issue around the ethics. Did they talk about the ethics? Did the study require? Because these are the things that you might, when you come to your not your conclusion, discussion part of your review, that's the thing, especially with the qualitative researchers, the issue around the ethics, because you might find that when you come to the quality of the thing, if the study didn't acquire any ethics clearance, for sure you'll be saying, no, these people were forced to participate in this study. So we might say that the finding of this study is not going to be acceptable. And many details of the studies, when you go to the reference, because yesterday I talked about identifying the study. By identifying the study, you must go to the reference list of the primary study to see if did you miss any study that you didn't include. So that's where you can go identify it, go on PubMed, type the title or type the DOI and see that study. Because you might have missed it during the search. And duplication of the publication. Is there any translation required? Because some of the studies they will be saying will include all the studies irrespective of the language that has been used, but did you translate it? So you have to write down the if on that study you need some. Because probably study you spoke about the abstract will be written in English, but when you go down, it's in Arabic. So as I indicated that this is a challenging extracting data is most one of the challenging part of writing this review. And it depends on the reporting. People who became an expert on a field of something, they don't report everything. because they think already, they know this is how this information should be. So they go specific to the result and give that short result. So you might find that you come across the challenge of poor reporting by the study author. So most of the information is missing. Because if you're doing the control RCT for the first time, you don't know what is a binding, and then they didn't mention a lot about around the issue of the blinding, because they think already everyone is going to be reading the article on the RCT, knows what's the blinding, how it's done, all those things. And we always mention during the protocol, I don't know how many of you have done this before, but I will have done it because unfortunately I'm getting all the information that I need. They will be saying, if there's a missing data, we are going to contact the author of the study. So the time that you might find you want to contact Prof. Mark Angel to elaborate what did you mean with that study when he said this, but it's not going to be always successful. Because we always see that I was busy conducting a survey now with the African funders. I had to sit on the phone to force people to answer or to participate on the survey, because they even send emails, but they were not replied. So the challenge is contacting the author. I know you're not going to always get the answers. So I just want to share with you something like how does the extraction form look like? So this is the kind of general information around your study, around your systematic review, having the ID number, the authors of that study, the title of that study, and the reviewers, MEEJX. These are the people who conducted the extraction. And that assumed means that this form was done by a JAV. The other part, the part where they're talking about the inclusion, exclusion. So this is as I indicated earlier, there is no specific or the standard form. So you are gonna do the form based on what you are looking for. And remember, you're gonna still be piloting it to see if it's going to be effective. So yeah, thank you so much. That's enough. Any question into our audience? Yeah. Any other questions?
Not sure if there are any questions online.
Just a comment.
Oh, sorry.
Just asking about maybe a comment as well. Is it okay if someone wants to use the Excel sheet, to just spread out but follow the basic questions for the unit?
Yeah, so the question is whether or not using Excel is fine. Absolutely. The only reason I dislike Excel is that you can't sort of pre-form the answers, if you know what I mean. Like, if somebody types the word vaccination, they can type it with a capital V or little v and so on. So by the time you try to filter everything, it becomes quite arduous to, it gives you quite a lot of work. Whereas if you're using like a RedCap or something, it's just, you can sort of say the nature of the field. But yeah, Excel is fine, a Word document is fine, Google Sheets would also work. What you're really wanting to do is to be able to reduce the information from all of those pages into a single table. And that's the hardest part. Now, Amy did say extract as much information as possible, and I think the thinking there is that you don't want to go back to the article. Once you've done the extraction, you want to put the article aside, you don't want to go back to it. My contention often is that people, particularly doing a research study as well, is that they're often trying to get too much information that they're not going to use. So the rider to Eddie's comment is, provided you're going to be using it. And I'll show you in a bit why that's important. Because it becomes quite tedious when you're extracting so many, fields, and your co-reviewer, who's not necessarily as vested in this project as you, will soon lose heart. Because, and as much as you think it's going to be nicely worded and you can just tick the box and copy and paste, it's never like that. You often have to sift through the information. You have to try and transpose it a little bit, or you have to put it in a way that makes sense to you. And so it becomes quite a lot of work. So I always like to tell students that I'm supervising to have an example of a paper that they're going to use as a template. So you already know what table 1 is going to look like, what the column headings are. Like the dummy tables must be done, or you create them yourself, but they must be done so that it's easy to work backwards. Oftentimes, we also have a situation where people will say, oh, I'd really like to compare let's say the vaccination rates in this part to that part, but they haven't extracted the data accordingly. And then to go back and find it in the article. And fortunately with digital, it's a little easier. You can put in keywords and find the relevant text. But it's just easier if it's done properly right from the start. And then when you summarize, it's so easy, right? For example, if your table is there, and I'm just putting a table in my head, you can start off with saying, the systematic review found 15 articles, the studies were done, and you just go through the list. 3 in high-income countries, 1, 2, 3, 4, 7 in low-income countries. The age ranges of the participants were 7, 10, from 7 to, and it's all there in front of you in a single space, as opposed to paging through one document after the other, trying to remember, was this higher, was this lower, green highlight, red highlight. It's just a disaster. So that table 1 makes your write-up so easy. You literally, there's no stress. You just have the table on the one screen and you write up in the other. So it just goes so quickly. And I'll show you an example of that also. Any other comments around data extraction? Yeah. So that point about we see things differently, as much as you think the data are clear, there's no ambiguity, I can assure you that there's always going to be some discussion about what should be included, and people missed a certain fact or something. So it's important to have a co-reviewer for that. And can I just say, I don't know what the culture is here. I know the culture in many institutions is one of competition. Can I just say, get rid of that if that's in your mindset? If that's a culture here, just change that. Don't be selfish, man. You're doing research. Adding the person who, if that data capturer didn't do the work that they did, that paper wouldn't have been possible. Add the person's name, People then say, oh yeah, but they're not on an academic post. So what? I had a young man who joined me. He came from a call center, joined me as a data capturer, and if it wasn't for him, those research projects wouldn't have happened. And I put his name down, and he said, what you going to put behind my name? I'm going to put my freaking brackets. And I said, no, we'll just have nothing. That's okay. And then encouraged him. He finished the higher certificate. He was so proud, and I put higher certificate behind his name. I don't care, it was in one of the big journals. H-Cert went behind his name. And today Razine's a data manager doing his honours degree in public health. So just be magnanimous. It costs you nothing to add somebody's name. Somebody does your data extraction, add their name. It's not going to change. Your name is still first or last, depending. But just add their names, People will then have interest in working with you, alongside you. And the person who's extracting data secondarily to you becomes the first author eventually. So many of you are just starting out in your research careers. And if after these 2 days, that's the only thing you remember, I will retire one day very happy that you understood that research is about sharing and about being magnanimous. And when you get the grant, don't hold on to the money. It's not your money to begin with. You know, I sent Rosine to conferences. He went to Yemen to do a data management workshop. You know, I could have said no, but he doesn't have any degree and he's just on a plane across whatever. But just be magnanimous. You never know where people will end up. Anyway, that's on the side. You know, old man talking. Any other comments around data extraction? Okay, cool.
So, Rob,
Sure. You can use the mic, please.
sorry, I missed this, but so I understand that Rayan is about refining your search and then
Managing your articles.
managing articles. But then with data extraction is then our separate platform that we generate all these. What's the name of that?
So that's what Paul was referring to. People use different methods. Some people will just have an Excel spreadsheet
Yeah.
with the data. Eddie showed you the one example that I had made with inclusion exclusion criteria for a stroke study. So the forms are really done according to your needs. If you do it in Word and you transfer it to Google Docs, then all the data comes out as a matrix, as a spreadsheet afterwards. So it just depends. Nobody really does it manually anymore. The big challenge is taking it from the extracted form to a table to allow data analysis and all that kind of stuff. And so Google Docs would be my preference rather than Excel. And the Google Docs then saves the data in Google Sheets as an Excel spreadsheet. If you have RedCap, that's probably the best way to do it. But there are other sort of databases like Info and so on that you can use. Yeah. I would recommend that if you're serious about doing research going forward, that you just learn one little database. I cut my teeth on Info when I studied at Ottawa University. They used Info as the database way for entry of data. And then from there, you can extract the numbers to do research, your analysis as well. Just get one of those. Google Sheets works. Google Docs, Google Sheets works very nicely. RedCap works nicely. It's all free. Just remember, if it's patient data, then you can't use the Google platform. You're not supposed to, because it's not GCP compliant. By the way, how many people have done GCP? Okay, so you're all aware of the fact. I'm sure your research director will make sure that there's a couple of GCP courses and links for you. You can't do research without GCP. Or if you're asking me, then your research director has got a lot of work to do. So GCP stands for Good Clinical Practice. And it came about following all the abhorrent things that occurred following, the Nazi camps and so on. A lot of those trials that were done, without any sort of ethical code. And so GCP basically takes you through all the components of research and ethical practice around that. So, for example, when you do informed consent, to make sure that there's no coercion. And we all say, no, but I'll never force somebody. But the fact that you're in a white coat offering a 200 Rand voucher to somebody who's unemployed is already coercion. And that makes them say, yes, I'll do the study. So it goes through all of those, all the way through to management of data and so on. And one of the aspects of good clinical practice is around the digital handling of data and the protection of personal information. And so the Google platform is not a good place. RedCap is fine, but even there, you don't want to put personal information of patients on there. But if you're doing systematic reviews, there's no issue with GCP, and you can use Google Sheets, Google Docs.
And just to mention, the faculty has started actually following up on how we could get the RedCap. It is free, however, from the findings, the institution has to join a consortium and it needs legal to approve that. So we are in the process of trying to get that.
You also need a server and a couple other things that need to be aligned. So Recap has got free courses on Coursera and other places as well to show you how to do it. Yeah. The GCP is an online, amongst other things, an online platform. It's generally about 2,000 Rand. Be warned, it is a long day. And oftentimes the people who do it love the work. But you just have to sit through it. There's a very good guy in Cape Town that we use. He's quite entertaining, even online. And yeah, one of the things he does is he allows people to put online and jokes in, so it's quite cool. And so in the middle of his presentation, something will come up about the two brothers who went to the day that was called they were double blind and something, that kind of jokes. But yeah, so you could do it that way, or if there's a company in Joburg, you pay for the person to come here, they charge you probably about 5,000 Rand, and then you can have a full class.
Yeah, we had it before COVID,
Okay, cool.
via Pfizer, but we know is after 3 years you need to
Every 3 years.
be consulted with Chris and coordinators.
Okay. Okay, because you can't be involved in any clinical trials without GCP as well. So even if you're just a doctor recruiting patients for a clinical trial, without GCP, it's not allowed. Just by the way. Anyway, any other comments?
Yeah, well, just wanted to really just shed light on this. If you have 15 articles you've actually selected.
Sorry, can we just pass the mic back, please?
Sorry. Yeah, just to make sure that we get this clear, if you have maybe 15 or 20 articles you have actually selected for inclusion in your study, those variables of interest, you need to actually, I don't think if there's any software that will extract it for you from those particular primary studies. You need to bring them out yourself.
Yes.
And then before you can probably transfer it to the software that would help. Yes. So that aspect is very important, and you need to predefine what those things are.
Yes. Yeah, so that's where the human, brain is needed. But having said that, in confidence, I believe you can get data extracted to a certain extent, but you're still going to have to verify it. Yeah, can I just say, you must do a little bit of work, right? You can't just have everything done for you. And that bit of work is quite important, as Professor mentioned. Okay, cool. So I'm going to do critical appraisal. Yeah, so I'm going to move on to critical appraisal. Now, it's a bit of a sort of chicken and egg situation because critical appraisal sort of also has a section on meta-analysis, but we'll leave that out a little bit, and we'll do meta-analysis afterward. But I think this is a good place to do critical appraisal. So we're now at a stage where you've extracted, you've got the article in front of you, and you've started to take out some of the data. And as part of the data extraction, you will do critical appraisal of the articles. And basically that just speaks to the fact that we recognize that there are articles published which have methodological errors or methodological inconsistencies. And this is not something we're sucking up out of our thumb. This is something that has been identified by editors of the various journals and so on. And I think we do know of examples of studies that have been published that have reached false conclusions for sure, right? So broadly speaking, and there are variations of this depending on the study design that you're looking at. But amongst others, broadly speaking, these are some of the biases that we worry about. So selection bias, now, so this gets a bit confusing and you just have to wrap your head around this, right? So when we talk about critical appraisal here, we talk about selection bias. We are not talking about the selection bias with which a systematic reviewer selects articles. Okay, we're done with that bit now. We know you need independent people and a third person, all that. So we're not talking about the selection of the articles now. We're talking about the article itself, that single research report that you have in front of you. And that is what we are talking about in terms of critical appraisal. So we've got the one article out of the 15 that we have found or selected, and that article in and of itself now has to be critically appraised. Now, as you will remember from yesterday, the nature of your question will determine the study design. And you know that study designs obviously are peculiar to the nature of the question, whether it is a prevalence study, whether it is a risk study, etc. The study design is peculiar to that. So it then follows logically that not all the elements of each article will be the same. For example, if you're doing an intervention study, okay, does speed bumps in a road slow down the traffic? You have an intervention and you have a control. There's a control neighborhood next door and you're comparing the two. So naturally, you would have to critically appraise how that intervention was executed, was the control appropriate, and so on. If you're doing a prevalence study, there's no intervention and there's no control. We just want to know how many people were vaccinated in East London, for example. So there's no intervention study there. So your critical appraisal tool will not have the nature of the intervention, will not be looking at bias around the intervention. Okay. So again, I'm hoping you're starting to see the importance of the spokes in the wheel, that once your question is well defined, you know the category of question, you can then know the study design that best answers that question, and you will then choose your critical appraisal tool according to that study design. So it all hinges off that question, that the question is done properly. And again, I say, don't do the question on the back of an envelope in 10 minutes while you're sitting in the car. The question is the most important component of doing a systematic review and indeed your research. Okay. Now, here I'm giving you broadly what the biases are. And when you move into the study design specific critical appraisal tool, you will then see which of these we need and don't need. So at the moment, just sit back and enjoy biases as a whole, and then we'll get into the specifics around the study design. Okay, so selection bias refers to systematic differences between baseline characteristics of the groups that are compared. That's in the case of what kind of study? An intervention study. You have a control group and you have an intervention group. The one group gets the new drug, the other group gets a placebo or aspirin, depending on what it is. Okay, so in an intervention study, the best study design is randomized controlled trial. Okay, because that renders the two groups as equal as possible. The biases are spread between the two groups, and that eliminates selection bias. Now, in order to generate groups that are similar at baseline before the study starts, the two important components there is the generation of the sequence and the concealment of the allocation of that sequence. So in other words, you need to generate whether people are going to go into the intervention group or the control group. And that's where randomization comes in. Okay? So, what are the ways, I'm asking a question, what are the ways in which we can randomize people into groups?
Computer-based algorithms.
Computer-based algorithm, which gives you what? Sorry, I'm so aware of people using Google, that's why I always make sure that you know what you mean. But yeah, so it's a computer algorithm which will allocate which number you're going to go to, and then what do you do with that? So it gives you a printout or it gives you a list, and then
Then it is assigned.
then it needs to be assigned. Yeah, okay. So you can generate the allocation into each group through a computer algorithm randomly. Do you know how to do that in Excel as a matter of interest? Okay, so it's very simple. Equals, bracket rand, R-A-N-D, and then you give the parameters between 1 and 100, and then it just generates a random code below. How often you do that when I have to split my 36 class members into groups? So that, they all want to be with their buddies, whatever, just make it tough, I just give them a random number. But you can do it in Excel. Okay, there's a lot of random generators. What's another way in which you can randomly assign people to groups? The series is not rocket science. Don't try and look like deep in your brain. It's like right in front.
Numbers in a hat.
Numbers in a hat. Correct. Yeah, cool. That's another way. How else do you randomize? I don't know, you're at a party, you want to break people up into groups. What else do you do? Sorry? Split down the middle. Okay, yeah. Okay, so there's a lot of ways, right? There's alternation. People do alternation. So the first person goes in the one group, second person goes in the other group. And as I mentioned yesterday, when you're the last person, they fight over who doesn't want you. Okay? So those are all different ways. You can use a die. You can use cards. Choose a black card, you go into group 1. Choose a red card, go into group 2. So there are lots of different ways that you can do that. Okay? The problem with that, of course, is that if you're the investigator, you can see who's going where, which is where the blinding comes in from our two experts here in the front, right? So you want to make sure that people don't know into which group they went. So that's where blinding comes in. But more importantly, you also don't want the investigator to be able to control who gets what. And that's where allocation concealment comes in. So generally, the randomization code is produced offline with a computer. It is then allocated into interventional control, but it's hidden, and we hide that with an envelope. The envelope is opaque, so you can't hold it up to the light, and it is sealed and signed, etc. Now, it's very interesting. There's an article about how people try to subvert the randomization code because they know their friend or their family member is coming, and it's a wonder drug that's normally would cost 10,000 rand a month, and if you want the trial, you get the drug for nothing. But you don't want to be in the control group because you're going to get a placebo. So then you can say, don't come now. After the third person, then you come. Because you know that person's going to go into that group. And so that's what you try to hide, and that's where the allocation concealment comes in. There's an episode in Grey's Anatomy, which I must have never watched, but I've seen that episode where she goes in and breaks into the office. You remember that? And then she opens up the envelope, checks the code, and changes things or whatever. Okay, so that's selection bias as pertaining to two groups, and you want to make sure the two groups are as equal as possible at the time of entering the study. Okay, now if you're doing a prevalence study, then selection bias is a different thing. You're not going to be asking about which group they're in. Okay, we're going to look at this in a minute, and I've particularly chosen prevalence studies because I know a lot of folks are going to do prevalence studies here, so I'm doing that in more detail. But what do you think selection bias would be as it pertains to a prevalence study where you want to know the number of people that have a condition out of a total control, out of a total population? what would be selection bias in that sample?
If you go somewhere, like if, for example, you go to like a tertiary hospital to go and collect data on something that gets frequently referred to tertiary services, but you might not find it if you went to like clinic. Could that?
Okay, so what was said was that if you recruit the people into your study from a tertiary hospital, so what is wrong with that, with doing that? How is that selection bias?
Because you'll get, so presumably the clinics in the area will refer everyone to the tertiary hospital.
Mm-hmm.
So if your population is only looking at, say, just around the hospital, but not the whole catchment area or drainage area of that hospital, then it will make it seem like that condition is more frequent or more, prevalent.
Okay, so I figured that's what you meant. So what you're saying is, if you have a condition that you are trying to find out in a bigger population area, but you only recruit from that hospital, that you'll get skewed to. But if you were doing a study on the number of people entering a tertiary hospital that have high blood pressure, then that sample would be right. It will be perfect for that. So it's all about generalizability of the result. So if you wanting to generalize your finding to a bigger group of people, then that bigger group of people must be represented in the sampling frame. And I'll speak about that in a minute, but you got the idea. So it's very subtle, but you can see that oftentimes even when you read an article, you realize that the group was not properly represented, but the conclusion is about all of South Africa. So if I do my group-based stress study, for example, which I did in a peri-urban poorer community of Cape Town, and I now say the prevalence of strep in South Africa is 22%, without actually saying in the peri-urban communities. So that would be the danger. So it's a generalization of the results, yeah? Okay, so you got the idea. Then performance bias, if it's an intervention study, refers to what goes on while the study is going on, okay? So here we particularly speak about blinding so that the personnel cannot be involved or in any way favor one group or the other. Then there's attrition bias or loss to follow-up bias. And the big problem here is not loss to follow-up, but loss to follow-up that is different between the two groups. So if in the intervention group, 20% of people drop out, in the control group, nobody drops out, then it might have implications for the findings and the generalization of the findings later. And then there's detection bias. And so this is how things are measured. Is there bias in the way that it is measured? And it's obviously easy in an intervention control study group because you want to make sure that they were measured in exactly the same way between the two groups. Now, there are times when that measurement will be difficult to blind. For example, if the intervention is surgery, it will be pretty obvious to the assessor that this person had a surgery intervention and the other person had physio, for example. And that may influence how they interpret or measure the result. You can have detection bias problems even in a prevalence study. Particularly if it's in different locations, so you're looking at the prevalence of, you're looking at BMI across two centers, maybe in Cape Town and in Eastern Cape. And you can have problems if they're not measured in the same way. They may use a different instrument, they may use a different guideline, etc. So that does happen. And then reporting bias, particularly when it relates to an intervention study, is if from the protocol they said they were going to do certain measurements and they don't report it in the actual paper. Now remember, again, this is about the individual study. This is not about the systematic review. Okay, so that's broadly those biases. So there are, as I said, tools that are peculiar to study designs, and Cochrane has the Robbins Eye tool, And if you go on the Cochrane website and look at the Systematic Review Handbook, you'll see what those are. Then there are other groups, Julian Higgins at the University of Bristol, he was at Cambridge as well. They have some tools and so on. So there are a number of tools. Now, it doesn't matter which tool you use, as long as you use a tool and you state what it is. Centre for Evidence-Based Medicine is based in Oxford. They have tools. Their tools are often easier, have less questions. So it doesn't matter, but as long as you use a tool that is peer-reviewed, that will be fine. Okay, so I'm going to go to prevalence studies now because I know this is something that a lot of you may be interested in. And I also know that it's something that if you haven't thought about, that's a great place to start to do a systematic review. Okay, so just as a reminder, what is a prevalence study? Well, maybe somebody can tell us what's their understanding of a prevalence study? The clue is there. Everybody looks away. Anybody tell us? Sorry? Maybe you can do that, I can't see you. So what's a prevalence study, folks? Who doesn't know what it is? Oh, so everybody knows what it is. How many affected by a certain condition? I need a little bit more than that. How many within a population are affected by? Okay, is that everybody's understanding? So in other words, out of the whole population, how many people have the condition, the red, out of the whole group? Okay, so it's a proportion of a population currently suffering from a disease or a particular condition of interest, and it allows researchers to assess a specific disease burden. And again, as I said yesterday, you must always be able to say what the point of your project is, and in this case, it's to inform social and healthcare professionals, policymakers, consumers, and so on, maybe around resource allocation, etc. I know you were saying that there's such a big need for clinicians in the Eastern Cape. And, you know, if you had, I'm sure we all know why we need them, but if you did a prevalence, some kind of prevalence study, then you have the evidence to say why you really need it. When we approached the Department of Health around rheumatic heart disease issues, they said, we don't know why you're making such a big deal. We don't see rheumatic heart disease. And then we did an evaluation of the notification system of rheumatic fever. Very interesting. So the way notification works, if you're not a clinician, or if you don't know, is that the local doctor, there are notifiable diseases, a list of, I don't know how much is it, 50, 100 now? Okay, no, it's a bit worrying if we clinicians don't know the number. But there's a list there that includes rheumatic fever, first case of acute rheumatic fever. And the way it works is the local doctor then will report that on a pink or green or something other color form. Those then get given to the nurse who collects all that information. Then in Cape Town, for example, TB will then go to the main city center where all the hospitals send their forms. And then all the cities within the Western Cape send their forms to Wales Street, which is in Cape Town, which is the provincial Department of Health. Then the provincial Department of Health sends all their forms to the National Department of Health. In the study that we did, there were more forms at Red Cross than there were at the National Department of Health. So that gives you an idea. Those forms just never left the building, as they say. And so no wonder they said rheumatic heart disease is not a problem, because they had 2 or 3 cases or something. Whereas we in our own hospital alone had 2 cases a month or something at the time. Anyway, you got the idea. So prevalence studies are important. People say, oh yeah, it's just a simple prevalence study. That's quite an important study because it does serve to inform policy makers and so on. Okay, did we lose YouTube? I mean, Zoom. Okay, so here's an example of a systematic review of prevalence studies that we did. So we actually also published the protocol as far as I remember. But yeah, this would be something, just substitute pneumocystis pneumonia with whatever condition you are involved with. Okay, so we understand what a prevalence study is, and then there is this point, this must be described, the difference between point prevalence and period prevalence. Does anybody have an idea what that is?
I assume with the point prevalence, maybe you'll say on the 16th of May, it's what we found, whereas the period, you'll say over the period of 6 months between June and December of 2024. This is what we found in our population.
Okay, but why would you not do everything in one go though? In one point, at one point.
Perhaps you want to observe the prevalence of this disease over a certain period rather than just looking at a single point.
Okay, yeah, so you're sort of on the right track. My understanding is more finely tuned around, because we then delve into incidents where we are saying over a period of time, we're wanting to know how many new cases appear. Whereas prevalence is one point in time. The problem is measuring that one point in time can be difficult if it's a procedure like echo that takes half an hour. And so if you want to do the prevalence of asymptomatic rheumatic heart disease in 3,000 people, you need to have 300 echo techs doing 10 people on that 16th of May, or you're going to take a few days to do it. My study took 3 years, and the biggest problem was, because of time out of the classroom, people that had been previously echoed were very happy to be echoed a second time, because by the time we got, of 2 years, they had moved from junior school to high school, and our grid said, we need 3 kids in grade 10, and we need 5 kids in grade 11, and they were randomly chosen. They were very happy to be included. So the problem with a study that takes a period to collect prevalence data is that people can be included twice. But yeah, so basically it's the prevalence measure at a single point in time, something like using a lab data, and you can then say, give me all the people that came in on that day with COVID on the 16th of May. That's easy. Whereas if it's a study that involves a period of time, it's a bit more difficult. The reason why it's important to be cognizant of this is because when you're doing your critical appraisal, you have to make sure that the recruitment occurred according to the definition of prevalence, and that it wasn't confused in the author's mind with incidence. So just for example, yeah? Okay. So you know what that is. You have a numerator, denominator, and you can then work out the proportion there. So again, we do systematic reviews because there's so much information, and even with prevalence studies, you can do a systematic review. Is the point. Okay. So here's an example of a protocol. This is Haley, who's a periodontist at UWC. She's interested in HPV infection and subtypes. Got that published, got it registered on Prospero, as Eddie mentioned, to bag it so that we have first claim to it. Okay, so again, formulating the review question is the important part. So maybe you can talk to your neighbor and try and put together the review question for this. And then tell us what your neighbor said. I won't put people into breakout groups, so it's only going to be like a minute, you know. So maybe for those online, you can try and formulate the question with the appropriate mnemonic. So PICO means mnemonic here. Let's actually change that here. Okay. Okay. Any thoughts? So what would be the appropriate mnemonic? Cocoa bomb. Okay. Anybody have anything else? Okay, cocoa bomb, tell us more.
Context, condition, and population. So there's no intervention in this case.
Okay, did everybody see that? There's no intervention. Okay, yeah, cool. So we got cocoa bomb, which is the mnemonic of choice for prevalence or incidence. You can see the condition, the context, and the population. And then if you were to break that down, you would get something like this. Again, the wording differs according to your own sort of style of writing and so on. But yeah. Okay. So, and yeah, there's just lots of examples. Here we've got the symptoms of seasonal allergies in our students during the first week of 2016 or May, whatever. Okay, so now we think again about the study design. And the best study design for a prevalence study will be cross-sectional. Now, sometimes you're desperate, right? Because you're not getting a lot of articles. And sometimes when there's a randomized controlled trial or a cohort study, you could also get the prevalence of the condition from one of the arms of those studies. Again, you would have to sort of stipulate that so that people know exactly why those were included. But the best study design is cross-sectional. Okay, so we've spoken about data extraction, and you will then extract from your articles so as to be able to put together this table, for example. Okay, so here you can see on the far left the country, the size of the study, the sample size. We can see there that almost all of them did random sampling, some doing multi-stage. We can see the response rate, the age range, and in this case, for the prevalence, Wolfie would have included the fact that he extracted urban versus rural data. Sometimes, of course, as much as you wanted to have a distinction between the two, you can see in this case there were studies that did urban and rural together. And then on your data extraction form, you indicate the number of males, number of females, and so on. And not all the studies will necessarily have the information that you need. And that is where writing to the authors may be important. Or you just have to be honest and say, not provided. ND, no data. Eddie made the point that it must be clear that it's not that you didn't fail, that you failed to extract the data, but that the data were not available. That's the important point. Okay. And then, of course, you're doing the critical appraisal. Okay, so just a few things here. When you speak about validity, there are two types of validity. There's the internal validity and the external validity. So the internal validity refers to whether or not the experiment or the research measured what it set out to do. Did the okay, this is just an example of a case, but you got the idea. We want to know whether or not the instrument, the nature of the study and so on has internal validity. And then the external validity concerns whether or not you can generalize the findings from that study done in a single location to situations outside of that particular study frame. Okay, so that's really what you want to do. Okay, so there are a few tools. There's a consortium called the Joanna Briggs. There's also this HOI tool. We normally use the HOI tool for prevalence studies from Australia. And these critical appraisal tools are put together with a consensus of researchers. I've just been asked to join one for observational studies, also some consensus forming protocol. But basically what would have happened was all of these researchers would have been in a room and they would have together through qualitative sort of procedures, they would have worked out what are the bare minimum domains that would be needed to render quality assessment of a study. Okay? And so here we can see that they came up with 10 questions. And the first 4 questions refer to external validity. In other words, are the results of the study generalizable outside of the situation? And then the next 6 questions were on internal validity. And those are the questions that get asked of each study. So it's not as tedious as you think, the critical appraisal. They're generally about 10 questions that will be asked. When it comes to randomized controlled trials, it's a little bit more complicated because you have to then look at randomization, allocation of segment, all of those things. But generally, there are questions with a sort of a legend that explains very clearly what it is you're looking for, and also where in the paper you are likely to find it. And so out of all the various questions that they would have asked, these were the 10 that came up. Okay, and then for each of those questions, you would give a rating, and they would explain to you what that means. So, for example, question 1, was the study's target population a closer representation of the national population in relation to relevant variables? Okay, so there we're talking about the sampling or the selection bias, right? And then if it was a close representation, the answer would be yes, which means there's a low risk of bias. And then it explains to you that the study's target population was a close representation of the national population. If the study's target population was clearly not, it would be a high risk. Okay, with respect to that question. It doesn't mean you throw the whole paper out now because it failed like question 1. Okay, it is just on that one sort of domain that you might have questions. Okay, and then it gives you a score, and then that score tallies up at the end, which I'll show you in a minute what we do with it. Okay, and then there's another example, was a sampling frame a true or close representation of the target population. What's the difference between a sample and a sampling frame? Anybody know? Somewhere back in first year or somewhere, you know, around sampling frame. You look like you want to give us an answer, sir. Have you heard of sampling frame before? Okay. Yeah. Although we did a course in basics of study design and sampling. I think it's important. You probably have done it and you've probably forgotten it, but it's quite important to know the difference. So a sampling frame is the complete group from which a sample is selected. So, for example, if you're looking at a disease in a certain area of the catchment area of a hospital, then the sampling frame would be that whole catchment area, and the sample will be selected out of the sampling frame. So the question then is, if the sampling frame is not appropriate, then clearly the sample is not going to be representative. Yeah.
Is the population? Is it
So that's the reason why this question is asking, is the sampling frame a close representation of the whole population? So in that sense, you're right, it's representative of the whole population, depending again on where you want to generalize your results. But for example, if your study was in South Africa, there is no way that you are going to be able to draw a random sample from the whole of South Africa. It's not going to work, right? So now you have to have a sampling frame from which you're going to select your sample. So in my case, I was looking at peri-urban communities of Cape Town. Now there are lots of peri-urban communities. There's Khayelitsha, there's Vanguard, there's Langa, there's a whole lot. I couldn't go to all of those in Cape Town and draw a random sample of 3,000 children. Because, I mean, you can imagine, logistically, you'd be driving from one location, another 50 kilometers to the other the next day, right? It doesn't work. So what you want to do is select an area from which you're going to draw your sample that is representative of all the peri-urban communities, for example. And so I chose two juxtaposed communities, which represents historically a Black community and a mixed colored community. So that way I knew I would be getting most of the urban communities of Cape Town, which would comprise, if we're looking from a genetic point of view, etc., which would comprise Black and colored folks, for example. And then that was my sampling frame, was Vanguard. And from Vanguard's 100,000 children, I chose 3,000. So when I generalize those results, I can generalize peri-urban communities, probably correctly of Cape Town, at the stretch of South Africa, for example. Okay, so a sampling frame, for example, can be a telephone book. For those of you who remember what a telephone book is, that could be a sampling frame, and you would just choose from that. It could be census data, more difficult. It could be all the people working in a factory, because you're looking at back pain. So the sampling frame would be all the employees in a factory. Now, if it included office workers and you're looking at back pain resulting from manual labor, then you have a problem with your sampling frame. So it's all about making sure the sampling frame is a close representation of the community with which you want to generalize. Okay, and so there you can see the yeses and the nos. So this is basically what a critical appraisal document looks like. In Haley's publication of BMJ, we sort of listed what it is, and we explain exactly how it will happen. So the critical appraisal happens in exactly the same way as data extraction. It's done independently by two people. There's a third person who will arbitrate. You will use the tool that is agreed upon and has been peer reviewed. It's not a tool that you make up yourself. And you then will come together with the scores at the end and come to an agreement. Okay, are there any questions? Okay. Okay, and so then you'll end up with some kind of summary for each of the studies. Each person will do their own summaries, and then they will add those scores, and they will then conclude that that study collectively has a low risk of bias because the score was less than 5, etc. Okay. So you don't throw the baby out with the bathwater, as they say. Does anybody know what that means? I only discovered the other day one. Sorry? As I share with you. Okay, I mean, you know what it means, right? So the baby's in the bath and you're throwing out the water and the baby goes with it. But where it came from is very interesting. So in I think it's like 1600s of England, people only bath once a year. Believe it or not, yeah. So if you visit Shakespeare's house, which I did have the privilege of visiting, you hear all these stories. So they bath once a year, and the master of the house bathed first, with a year's dirt. And then it went down in order. So by the time the baby was bathed, you can imagine the color of the water. And so oftentimes, so the expression is basically, make sure the baby's out of the bath, the water's so dirty that you don't throw the baby out with it. Okay, I mean, imagine all this clothing that they wore. Imagine take that off every day to shower. It would have been a disaster. Okay, so you don't throw the baby out with the bath water, but instead what you do is you rate the risk of bias, and then you deal with the risk of bias in your discussion and analysis. And I'll show you how to do it. Okay. Is there some light bulbs going on? Is this like cool information to read or anything? Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's making sense. But I just want to check in terms of.
Can you use the mic, please?
Oh.
Thanks.
So I just wanted to check with regards to the sequence of doing things. So you get your articles, then you do your data extraction, and then you critically appraise.
Yeah, so the critical appraisal is like the 9th sheet or 10th sheet in your data extraction pack.
And then if it's high risk of bias, do you then throw it out?
No, that's throwing the baby out of the bath.
So you just mention it in your writing.
No, I'm going to show you what you do with it later.
Okay.
Yeah, so at this point in time, you're just giving it its label and you're parking it. And when it comes to the analysis, you will see how we will deal with the risk of bias articles. That's the reason why I said it's a bit difficult to know where to give the stop. But I think this was the right place because I'll show you later. It's another spoke on the wheel coming up. Yeah. Okay. Any other questions? Okay. I know it's time for a bio break, but I'm just going to quickly show you this. So at the end of all of it, you hope to produce some kind of pictogram, some kind of chart that will give the reader in a single glance an idea of the risk of bias. Okay, so you can see on the top left-hand side, this was prevalence studies, I think, and this is just a sort of excerpt of it, but you can see there that in terms of the definition of the numerator, there were no concerns. The same for the diagnosis, and I'll show you the questions there, but the question would be something like, was the same diagnostic tool used across all, for all participants, for example. And then you can see the study objective was not maybe clear in as well as good as some of the other domains and so on. But you got the idea that you will be able to produce at the end of it, and there are tools that produce it, otherwise you just do it in Excel, that will produce something like this. You can see this, the middle one here is a comparison of diagnosis tools. And so you have the index test and the reference standard. And so there you can see the greens and the high risk in the sort of pale pinkish color there. And then the table on the far right is for a randomized control trial. So they're asking all those questions around allocation concealment and randomization generation, random generation and so on. And there you can see quite a few concerns, quite a few reds, quite a few yellows where data were not provided. So this is ultimately the end point of doing the critical appraisal. Okay, I think we'll take a bio break now, coffee break. So I sort of covered the bulk of it. Unless there are any further questions, shall we take a 15-minute break? Yeah. Okay, thank you.
So that's fine.
Say something like that.
Because you keep on the letters so that you repeat it study. Sure.
Which is
But it's going to depend on what's
Still be term.
as a literature.
Yeah, like thorough, no.
Like what about
so yeah.
And instruct students more part those, and then for this, because some of them are not just not being short and so. Basically, it's finished the part, some of those.
I was thinking about the same thing. Actually, yeah, take it, that's what, take it how we get it, happens out and from their start. I know it's like spoon feeding, but I think that's what,
Things are not in their research, and they feel this might be something they can get hands on this. It's a president still. But I think this is a big best part of the office, see how it's done. The way it's not that. Yeah, so I think we can do that.
because yesterday was a bit also, I got a bit lost towards the end. It was a bit heavy in the end when you were doing that stuff. So it was a bit.
Okay, so I'll tell you what, let me go through. I mean, today I'm trying to release these. I can do an example of the questions from that came out of it. I can do that now for the critical appraisal. But let me go through the meta-analysis. I've got an example of a thesis that sort of shows how it's systematic component of a thesis that shows how. Yeah. So let me just get through all the topics first and then maybe.
Oh, before you run away, clearance protocol. Are you ready? One of the
A premise protocol for the study of the system.
for systematic review. Okay.
So yes, I have. I could do that, and there are the ones that I've also shown that we published.
So would you add that on to that?
I can add a protocol on it.
Okay, that would be great.
And it is what was also in the plan. But the problem is you want to make it specific to your, that matches your field and quality, that matches your field. And that may be better to send me, if you tell me more is what you're thinking, so that I can definitely find my that's good. I've got examples of my students that I'm happy to share.
Yeah, because the other year we did the tablets of promoting you sharing those study countries.
Okay.
But
So
we
that's,
didn't, but we didn't like kind of really even technically that
okay, so that wasn't a systematic.
Yeah, no,
That's just okay, wait till I'm done. Yeah. I know.
You do it every day, so it's like second nature to you. You use us.
Yeah. Let me get
And the revenues go down.
Yeah, I mean, part of what we do, and so we them. We want to use but then I know you feel like, well, you've given me my first person, right? That's how we
That's all.
You can see that. We just
I'm gonna take a prophylactic loo break.
Did you not go now? No, that is still like chatting. Yes, man. We have to look at this shit. Yeah, we're not doing this and that.
Yeah, I think as much as we understand the logic of systematic reviews being a springboard into research, they are.
Yeah, but at least they have a method which you can follow.
Yeah,
Which makes it predictable. That's the problem with normal research campaign.
So I was going to ask about like how do you know that you can trust all of the articles, let's say that 20, that even if it comes to 100 that you get, until we got to this critical appraisal, which is every single one of them, and I realized every single one you have to scrutinize over.
But it becomes easier, man. It's like with most things. First couple of times it's hard, right? Your eye will just fall.
Yes.
Like in the method section, you'll just immediately know.
You'll spot
the
gaps.
Yeah. And when during the ivermectin sort of period, it was useful to have that skill.
Yeah.
Because you can immediately see. I think I have an example of the ivermectin thing.
I was going to ask about your experience in COVID. Must have been because you must have been such an asset to the community, but you must have been bombarded with.
Yeah, he was much more involved in COVID than I was at the time. I had, people sending me things asking me to comment on it and that kind of stuff. And then we did a WHO review as well. But yeah, it was a busy time. There's one registrar who finished his exams already, but he still has to do his MF. And he was going to do a COVID thing, but it was just hectic at the time. And there's just so much information like what you've been doing. So anyway, I'm glad you're slightly into this.
Yeah. There's no way. Yes, no way.
Okay. Thanks very much for hanging in there. We will do a little bit more of some practical showing of systematic reviews and so on in a minute, of protocols. But just the end of this section, and then we're going to go on to meta-analysis, just to round off all the theoretical components. So as I said, there are different ways in which we can represent the critical appraisal of our studies. So here, for example, you can see the studies, each study is in a row. So there's the country Algeria, there's Malik, and then there's a representation of the bias within the external and internal validity with the overall risk of bias given at the end there. Okay. So this is the example that I showed you, where it shows the cumulative risk of bias for each of the domains. So, for example, in this case, for question 1, we can see that 85% of all the articles had low risk of bias. And then we can see, for example, domain 10, where the numerators and denominators for the parameter of interest appropriate. We can see there that only 65% had a low risk of bias. Of all the articles evaluated, 65% had low risk of bias. And then we had that band of red there, which was high risk of bias for about maybe 10-20% of the articles. Yeah. Yeah, so these are all different ways in which you can present it. Yeah. Okay, so you got the idea. Okay, I'm now going to jump into the meta-analysis. Okay, so as we alluded to yesterday, if you are doing a study that involves numbers as opposed to qualitative research, it does present the opportunity to do analysis across all the studies. Having said that, the fact that you are doing quantitative studies on prevalence, for example, doesn't necessarily mean that it's amenable to a meta-analysis. And that's where your, sort of eye has to come in to determine whether or not those studies can be put together in a meta-analysis. And we'll see reasons why we will not do a meta-analysis as we go along. Okay, so what is a meta-analysis? So meta means across, metamorphosis, cross forms as it were. So meta-analysis is a statistical procedure that pools the results of several independent studies that are considered to be similar, and it really aims to provide a quantitative summary of the overall treatment effect. So that's really the aim. The important thing is that it's a statistical procedure, and so the results around the confidence intervals and all that are produced obviously in a statistical way, or in an algorithm that is statistical, and it still means that you need to apply your mind in the interpretation. So whatever the result is, you don't just take it at face value, it still needs you to read through it and understand it. Okay, we've lost Zoom for this computer. Okay, so basically it integrates the results of all these independent studies, and then it becomes part of a systematic review when appropriate. And there were non-systematic reviews or traditional reviews that also had meta-analysis done. Oftentimes it's almost used interchangeably, but effectively the meta-analysis refers to the numbers component when you combine studies together. So now it is worth thinking about the different types of outcome measures that can be meta-analyzed. So traditionally, you would look at the two broad categories of dichotomous and continuous data. So dichotomous, two, obviously refers to one of two states. So you either died or not, you have the outcome or not. It's a straightforward 0 or 1 state. And dichotomous data generally are compared or used in ratios for comparison. So in other words, you have two groups, two arms in a study. The one arm got the intervention, the other arm got the placebo, and you then calculate how many people in the intervention arm got the outcome, how many people in the control arm got the outcome, and you compare the ratios one with the other. And from that, you can then calculate the risk or the odds of that event occurring in the one group compared to the other. Now, the word risk doesn't necessarily mean a bad thing. Okay, so the risk of getting better can be an outcome. We normally associate risk with a negative connotation, but it really means the probability or the chances of that event occurring in the one group compared to the other group. Okay? Or sometimes you may calculate the risk difference between them, so it's not a ratio, but you may measure the difference in the outcome between the two groups, if it's an absolute count. So for example, in Iman's study looking at the laser therapy for fungal infections, she would have looked at the difference between the two, the number of colonies in the one group versus the other group. Okay, but basically it's dichotomous data that can either be a yes or a no, and you compare them in a ratio. Now, the question is then, what do you do with continuous data? So an example of continuous data would be blood pressure. And that's where the result can be anywhere along a continuum, along a line of results. Age would be a continuous datum. Temperature would be continuous, etc. And so now the problem is when you try to look at the difference between two groups with continuous data, there's no longer a ratio, it's no longer 0 to 1. And so that's where you would say in group 1, the change in the blood pressure was -5 points, and they got the intervention. And in group 2, the change in the blood pressure was 0, and then you can measure the difference between the two groups. So that is normally a subtraction sum. One value minus another. Okay, no ratios involved. So those are the two broad categories. And of course, then for prevalence study, the outcome measure that you'd measure there would be a proportion. The number of people that got the condition over the total number of people that were sampled. Okay. So this is just background, will become a bit clearer as we go. Okay, so I spoke about risk. It's the chance or the probability of having an event, good or bad income and outcomes. And here's an example. There were 889 soldiers that took penicillin for strep throat. 16 of them developed traumatic fever after 6 weeks. So what will you do? How will you calculate the risk? The number of people who got the event over the total number of people getting the intervention. So in this case, it will be 16 out of 889. Okay, straightforward. Okay, and so normally you would construct this 2-by-2 table where the exposure or the exposure or the non-exposure to the intervention on the left-hand side and the disease, no disease is on the, or the outcome is on the other axis. Okay, now, relative risk is where you look at the risk in the one group relative to the other, compared to the other. So in that first example, it was the 16 soldiers taking penicillin out of the 889. And now we go on to realize or to see that there were 26 people in a group of 910 who didn't get the intervention who got traumatic fever. So the risk in the intervention group would be 16 over 889, you all understand that? And the risk of developing rheumatic fever in the control group is 26 out of 910. See that? Yeah. Okay. And so you can then calculate the proportion in each of those. So it's 0.018 divided by, or as opposed to 0.029. So that is the risk of developing it in each of the groups. And now we are able to compare the one relative to the other, and that's risk ratio or relative risk. So the relative refers to comparing the one group with the other. And when you do the division, it comes out at 0.639. Okay, does anybody want to tell us how we would use the 0.63 in a sentence?
So the patients that were allocated to receiving the antibiotics had a 63% less risk of developing fever when compared to the placebo.
As you said it, were you a little bit uncomfortable? Does it sound a little clumsy? So is it 63% less risk, or is it a 37% reduction in risk?
37% reduction.
Yeah. It always gets confusing. Good try. Thanks for doing that. So the easiest way, the way I like to say it, it sounds clumsy, but it makes sense, is that those who receive the intervention had 0.63 times the risk of developing rheumatic fever compared to the control. And in your head, you know if it's 0.63, that means it's less. If I had an equal chance, that number would be 1. Because the division between the two, the numbers would be the same. So to get an answer of 1, they will both be 0.018. Divide the one by the other, the answer is 1. The risk is equal to 1. When it's less than 1, they have reduced risk. What is that the risk? It's 0.63 times, or as I rather say, a 37% reduction in risk. So you can convert it to percentage, okay? And then it makes sense to understand what it means. But oftentimes my students get, in the exams, they get tongue-tied where they're talking about less risk. I know they know what it means, but the correct definition obviously is important. So it's 0.63 times the risk. And in this case, it would be from the numerator to the denominator. Sometimes it's the other way around. And that's why it requires a bit of a brain, right? So if the 0.29 was on top and the 0.18 was at the bottom, that will give you about 1.7 or something, I would imagine. Then you can speak about a 70% increased risk, for example. Okay. Okay, does that make sense? I'm happy to explain it again. This forms the basis of interpreting a meta-analysis. Okay, this is the risk in one study only, the relative risk. And we're going to do it for a whole lot of studies, and we're going to come together with a synthesized estimate of all of them. Yeah.
So by definition, is relative risk looking at intervention over the control?
In this case, yes.
What do you mean in this case? Is that not a...
Because it depends what the question is. Yes. But in this case, it would be the risk if you took the intervention of developing the outcome versus if you took the control. Yeah.
And Prof, just saying, assuming the risk or the group that is the intervention is 0.009, then it means that that intervention, there should be a little, probably it's not something that needs to be continued based on the high risk.
Oh, if it was a high risk in and of itself, yeah. So that's interpreting the actual data for itself. Yeah, true. Yeah. But I mean, a 63% reduction in risk, a 37% reduction in risk, is that enough to make you think it's a good idea? So if you have 1,000 people, 370 people, 370 people less will get. That's probably.
But the sample size is quite small.
Depends, yeah. The sample size of 800 is quite, it's okay. But yeah, that's not necessarily. Anyway, without getting too much into the specifics of it, I'm just wanting to make sure everybody understands what relative risk means. That it's the risk of the intervention group relative to the risk of the control group. Okay. And as was said, these numbers, the absolute numbers, are also warrant a look, because that will give you an idea of the overall sort of efficacy when it's worth it to do it. But in terms of relative risk, I hope you understand what that refers to. Yeah. And so I normally say something like this, 0.63 times or 63% of the risk. Okay, now the issue here is that you're only doing a single study. And for that single study, because you have sampling variation, sampling frame may not have been right, etc., it is desired to know the bounds, the certainty of that estimate, and we use the 95% confidence interval for that. I know it's not a pure definition, but loosely speaking, it means that if you did the study 100 times, the result would fall 95% of the time within the 95% confidence interval. The pure statistician will give you another definition, which is probably right and better, but just loosely, if you did it 100 times, 95% of the time will fall within those values. Okay. So then, the statistically significant point is if the confidence interval does not include the point of no effect. Okay? So the point for no effect, the relative risk of 1 means no difference. So if your confidence interval includes 1, it means that one of the times that you repeated that experiment, 1 may have been the answer. And so that's when we talk about statistical significance. And it's all about the 95% confidence, whether it includes, in the case of relative risk or odds ratio, whether it includes 1. So people often use the word statistically, or they use the word significant loosely in an abstract. And I would caution you from using it just willy-nilly. It really must mean that there's a statistical p-value to prove the point. Okay. So, in the case of, which comes to Paula's point here, the relative risk of that 0.63 will come at 0.34 versus 1.17. So what this is saying then is that if you repeat this experiment a number of times, it may be only as low as 0.34. As high, it could be as low as 1.17 and as high as 0.34. Okay, so you would have to then obviously weigh it up. Now you can see this includes 1. So therefore it's not statistically significant. That one study taken on its own. And that's where meta-analysis comes in, where because the study size is maybe small, and it also refers to the number of events that occurs, you are wanting to narrow the confidence interval to give you a better estimate of that effect.
Sorry. So obviously, higher your confidence interval, so let's say 99%, then it would be more, you would be more confident that the value, that it will be statistically significant. But then is 95% sort of the number that's been chosen by the scientific community to agree and say, okay, this is what we will agree, that this is what it means to be significant. And it doesn't have to be 97 or 98.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's all about how does compared to chance, what is the risk? And the number for chance is 5%. Yeah. So you're basically saying relative to the chance finding, this is significant. Yeah. Okay. So I've explained what that is. So now we come to the forest plot. So the data from in a meta-analysis can be presented in many ways. Sometimes my student Kimona, she just presented, my doctoral student just presented the data in a table. There's different ways. But basically a forest plot has this kind of architecture. So you can see there that the comparison here was penicillin versus control. And the outcome was the incidence of rheumatic fever. This was a study done by Kate Robertson, who looked at whether or not patients receiving penicillin have an increased risk of rheumatic fever. Okay, so you can see there were a number of studies, a lot of them are old, 1951 and so on. And generally, so each line represents a study. And then most meta-analyses will give you 2 columns where they give you the number of events out of the total number in that study for the intervention, and then the same for the control. Okay, so you can see there are a couple of cases where the number of events that occurred was 0. So you can imagine when you have 0, it makes it difficult. You can't compare 0 with 0. But then you can see with Brink, there were 2 out of 197, so that's about 1% versus 2.5% in the control group, and so on. So all of our forest plots will have the studies listed line by line. And then for each of those studies, the forest plot will tell you what the relative risk was for that study alone. So here you can see where there's a 0 cell, it's not estimable. Whereas for the others, even though there's a 0 in one cell, it was able to give you an estimate. What the meta-analysis program does is it actually converts the 0 to a 0.5 so that it can do the calculation. I know you're frowning. That's what the experts tell us happens in the background. You don't see it. Okay. So you have the relative risk of each of those studies, and then you can see, if you look at that 95% confidence interval on the right, you can see that almost all of them include 1. So those studies on their own were not statistically significant, except Denny, who had a large number, and that confidence interval didn't include 1. Okay, you can see that, right? Okay, so then the values of each of the individual studies are represented by a square with a line through it. The line is the 95% confidence interval. Okay, so if you look at Wanamaker there, you can see it was 0.2. So in other words, in the Wanamaker study, people who got the intervention had 0.2 times the risk, or 1/5 the risk, or an 80% reduction in the risk. of getting rheumatic fever compared to the control group. And the width of the 95% confidence interval did not include 1. And 1 in the forest plot is represented by a solid line. And we call it the line of no effect, or of no statistical effect. So at a glance, you can see that most of the studies actually cross the line of no effect, meaning that each of those studies, in and of themselves, are not statistically significant. If you had to have a gun put to your head and you had to make a decision based on those, you wouldn't say take the drug. Okay, is that clear, right? Then you can see there are two studies clearly statistically significant that don't touch the line of no effect. Cool. And that you can see is represented by the numbers of the 95% confidence interval. Okay, now when you combine studies, I know you're already thinking, but surely the size of the study must make a difference. Because if I take 2 surveys, one of 100 people and one of 10,000 people, and the prevalence of smoking in the 100 people is 90% because it was done in a bar, and the prevalence of the 10,000 was 2% because it was done at a church youth event, hopefully. Should be 0. If you combine those 2 together, you can't simply say 90 plus 5 divided by 2 and it's 42%. You're immediately going to say to me, man, you have to take into account the bigger number. You're going to have to take into account the sampling. You're going to have to take into account a lot of stuff. Was the question asked the same way? Did they ask vaping and cigarettes? Blah, blah, blah. Okay? So the meta-analysis actually takes into account the weight, i.e. the relative contribution to each study to the overall effect. Now, the overall effect is represented by a diamond. So in this case, you can see the overall effect was 0.2, and the width of the diamond does not touch the line of no effect. Therefore, the width of the diamond indicates statistical significance. Now, the question is, what about those small studies? Should we have included them? As you can see, the synthesized effect accounts for the size of the small studies. The fact that they had wide confidence intervals doesn't really matter, actually, because you can see in the relative weighting, they actually contributed very little because of the size of the study or the lack of events that occurred in those studies. And then, in the case of an intervention study, the x-axis of the forest plot on either side of the line of no effect, i.e. equal to 1, will indicate whether it favors the treatment or the control. Sometimes those are turned the other way around, so you just have to use your brain. Sometimes the software doesn't do it correctly, or sometimes it gets published incorrectly actually because they didn't change it in the software. And particularly when the question is asked like in a negative way. So here you got the incidence of rheumatic fever. Had the question been the incidence of remaining healthy, then having a 0.2 estimate, like throws your mind out, right? Because that means that was meant to be a good thing, but now it's on the wrong side, for example. So you just have to make sure you just look at that properly. I mean, these days we'll get checked properly, but if you're doing a meta-analysis, and I'm going to show you a tool that you can play around with to do meta-analysis, you just have to watch out for that. Okay, is it clear now? Did I explain the forest plot clearly? I apologize if I spoke a little bit to you if you're not radar. I sort of revert to my lecture. Okay, is it clear? Everybody understands how the forest plot works. Okay, so when you look at the meta-analysis of a forest plot, these are sort of the questions you're going to ask. What is being compared? What is the outcome? How many studies are there? What's the measure of effect? The most weight, the least weight, and so on. And then heterogeneity, I'll explain after lunch to you. Okay, and then of course the 95% confidence interval. So there are a few programs that allow you to do your analysis. So these are programs that have been already sorted and it's easy to do. But of course, you can do it in Stata, you can do it in R. Are people familiar with Stata or R? Anybody got any idea? There are other tools on the internet as well that you can use. Okay. Revman has gone through a bit of a change now. They have an online version of Revman and so on. But you can still download the desktop standalone version in places, yeah? Okay, and so basically what happens here is with Review Manager Revman, that's an overall systematic review tool. So it enables you to actually put your whole systematic review together, as can be seen by the titles on the left there. So there's a section there, for example, where you have the characteristics of the studies, and then you have the included studies and so on. But basically, the analysis component is also done in this overall package called Revman. Now, they used Revman in the old days in Cochrane to ensure uniformity across all the Cochrane reviews. They had the same headings, the same size, fonts, all of that kind of stuff. And then within this Revman package, as you can see there, is the analysis component. So if you look at this plot here, let me grab the annotation tool. Okay, and we look in this area. Okay, you can see what the comparison is. The comparison is penicillin versus the control, and the outcome is incidence of rheumatic fever. And then you can see, I'm just trying to get rid of, I've got a tool in the way here that I can't see. Then you can see we've got the characteristics of the included studies there. I'm trying to get a point here. Okay, I'm not sure why. Anyway, oh, it's my data bottom. Sorry, just give me a second, guys. There we go. Yeah, there we go. So here you can see these are the characteristics, the included studies of Brink, Delhi, and so on. This is just an example I did for the purpose of the presentation. So you can see here we've included these 4 studies. And in the analysis, those 4 studies then end up in this table from which the forest plot would get constructed. So you can see Brink 1951 there's 1951, this is Delhi 1950, and so on. And then, based on your accurate data extraction with the appropriate numbers and the appropriate variables, you will have in the intervention group or the experimental group, you will know the total number of people that received the intervention, in this case penicillin, and the number of incidents, the number of rheumatic fever cases that occurred. So in the experimental group, i.e. penicillin, in the Brink or the 1951 study, the Brink 1951 study, there were 798 participants who got penicillin, the experimental intervention, and of them 2 got rheumatic fever. In the control group, in the same study, there were 804 participants and 17 of them got rheumatic fever. And so you got those from each of the studies until you get the total number of events was 11 out of 2,781 added together, and it was 59 or whatever out of 2,700 odd in the control. Okay, now the cool thing with the review manager is that as you enter the numbers on the left there, it then produces the estimate with a box and a line for the confidence interval for each of the studies, and then it comes together into the diamond. Okay, and then you can see obviously it's on the side of favoring penicillin, it's statistically significant, doesn't touch the line of no effect. Okay, now you can do it in Stata, you can do it I don't think Excel allows you to do it, but you certainly can do it in Stata or any of the other stats programs where you will have the same columns. You enter the numbers, and then you run the routine, which I'll show you in a sec, what that would be, to do the meta-analysis block. And you can see there it also indicates the weighting for each study to contributing to the final result. Okay, any comments?
How do you decide which studies to include for your meta-analysis?
So we'll talk a little bit about that. That's a good question. Not all the studies that you've selected will have all the data pertaining to your outcome. And so, as you could see in the one example, there were 0 patients there, so it couldn't be included. And then in your protocol, you would write something like around a sort of a subgroup analysis. So you may have articles of low quality. So you may exclude them, include and exclude, see the difference. And also if there is heterogeneity, if there's variation between the participants, one study had only old people, one study had only females or something, you then know you can't meta-analyze those. Okay, but we'll talk about that in the after lunch. Yeah. Okay, yeah, so that's just a little bit bigger, you can see it there. Okay, let me just get rid of this. Okay, so here's an example of the use of mobile messaging for vaccination recall to ensure that people come back for their recall. Okay. So I'd like you to now turn to your neighbor and try and interpret and discuss this first block, please. And feel free to move around and chat. Okay. So remember those questions are things like what's being compared, what's the outcome, what contributes the most weight, blah, 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 and then interpret the result.
And the risk, yes, risk ratio is 1. Then try each group. Okay, so that's so there was 59% going. Yeah. So I think studies it's only Shy, Covanda, and Stockholm B. That's that. Yeah. Just gone.
So just see if the idea, in addition to saying next week. No, for sure. And then I'm going no Monday. Okay. Hello. Yeah. Cool. Love the discussion, the buzz. It's really nice. Okay, so just any thoughts, comments? Yeah, there was a lot of noise here a minute ago. Any thoughts? You're standing out with your red dress, your red jacket.
We just ask if our interpretation is significant or not. Very wrong. Okay.
Sorry, can I just ask if you post on mine, please, for the online participants?
So we were saying we have to go back to what you said initially. It depends on the outcome. And in this term, the SMSs is now favorable. It's a favorable outcome. So even if you are passing that line of 1, it means it's a favorable outcome now, because it's we are seeing this graph as opposite to the one we saw in the previous slides. So if you look at Schmidt results, it's non-significant because it's on a 1. And then if you look at our overall data, the diamond, that 1.25 representative, means that's the total from all the studies that we took. That means it's favorable to send out SMSs. And then if you want to look at specific data, you can go back to your table and look at the numbers to interpret your forest.
Thank you. Thank you. Anybody want to add to that? Anybody see anything different?
Did we say it's not statistically significant? This is statistically significant.
So this is statistically significant.
Yeah.
So it does. So in terms of the forest plot, in the pure interpretation, that's all right. The question then comes in the whole lot of other things around, the generalizability of it. There may be some other questions you may ask. In fact, let me ask you, what would be some of the other questions you may ask, despite the fact that it's statistically significant? What else would you want to know?
So one of the questions that I wanted to know is that I'm comparing SMSs to no SMS or non-communication, or is it SMS versus a phone call? And it's all the studies operate the same contract.
Okay, that's a good question. So just to repeat what our colleague has said, was the nature of the control. It will be worth knowing what that is. Are they all, is it doing nothing, business as usual? Is it a phone call, or is it a pamphlet or something else? Yeah. Okay, that might be worth knowing. So one of the things you must remember when you're doing a randomized controlled trial, you are rendering the groups, as we said, as equal as possible, such that the only thing that differs between them would be the intervention. So anything that happens, any changes in the outcome, must be attributed only to the intervention. So to a certain extent, it doesn't really matter what the control is, because for that study, the SMS as an intervention was significant, for example, was the thing that was measured. And so, yeah, so that is a rule of thumb. We don't make the mistake, like some people say, I think I might have that in one of my slides, as an example of cancer, and you may have an intervention, but everybody's got cancer. So then the intervention, everybody was smokers, and the intervention was around lung cancer. The fact that the controls had lung cancer was smokers doesn't matter, because the only way the intervention control group differed was by the intervention. I'll show that in a sec. So, but you're right, it is worth knowing, and you may want to do a subgroup analysis, because you may find for those there was a greater effect. So the studies with a bigger effect may well have been where the controls were the same compared to like a radio or something else. Yeah. Okay, cool. That's a good question. The other thing that you probably also want to know is the nature of the SMS, because the SMS could be, I think I may have mentioned this, you could have, a gory picture of somebody, not having taken the vaccination, for example, as opposed to simply, did you know, like, the phone calls you're getting with the voting at the moment, yeah? Okay, so, but you've got an idea, everyone's able to interpret reasonably, okay?
How's the weighting get calculated?
Yeah, so that's a bit complicated. So the weighting it's got to do partially with the sample size. Generally, larger samples will contribute to greater weight. However, why do you take that? It's also got to do with the number of events. So if you have very few events taking place, it makes it very difficult to make a comparison. So for example, if you have one event out of 1,000 versus 2 out of 1,000, to compare the 2 and the 1 out of 1,000 is so minusculely small, it's the weighting of that study, even though it's a large study, will not be sufficient because of that small number. So generally where you see the weighting is lower, even though the numbers are big, that's because of a few events. Yes. And I will gladly give you a prime on that. Okay. Okay, so this was a prevalence systematic review done by one of my colleagues, one of my students. She was from Libya, and for her master's she did a systematic review as well as a registry study where she created a recap database and set all the parameters in place for a registry. Okay. So generally, when you do a systematic review, your table 1 will look something like this. It will have all the salient features that you need, for your systematic review. So here you can see she's able to show in Africa, all the various countries in Africa, what the setting was, when the study was done, and so on. That becomes table 1. This comes, of course, from your data extraction form. You do your data extraction properly. To do this form would be a breeze. Okay. And then what you would do, you would take the quantitative component, so you'll take all the numbers, and you'll put it into a spreadsheet. This happens to be the spreadsheet for the statistical program called Stata. Not everybody has Stata, there's a cost to it, and so a lot of people will prepare it in Excel for me, and then I'll give them the template, and then we quickly can do the analysis. But effectively here you can see into the meta-analysis, we've got the region, the study design, the denominator, the total N, and the numerator cases N. And you can immediately see.
Sorry, please, there's a question online.
Okay.
Regarding probably what we just concluded. It says, does it matter that the sample is heterogeneous, really, adolescents and children, actually?
Okay, sure. So the question was, does it matter that the population included in the meta-analysis comprised adolescents and children, for example? So again, a little bit later, we'll look at heterogeneity and the effect of that, the heterogeneity or variability in terms of the participants. But it doesn't matter if you are going to do a subgroup analysis later to show the difference between the two. So the most important thing, and that's what Edison alluded to, was when you extract the data, to extract sufficient data to allow you to do these subgroup comparisons. And in the SMS study, very interestingly, comparing the adolescents with the children produced a very interesting result. Because the truth of the matter is, it's not the children who have the cell phone, it's the parents. And so you're actually, in a sense, comparing adults with cell phones versus adolescents with cell phones. It's a very interesting result. Anyway, so now you can see into the database or into the spreadsheet with which we are going, from which we're going to do the meta-analysis. You can see immediately this is going to allow us to do subgroup comparisons. We are able to report by region. We are able to report by study design. If we were interested in urban versus rural, we would put that in. If we were interested in, for breast cancer, menopausal, premenopausal, postmenopausal, we will have those in. If we were interested in the method of detection, is it by screening, is it by whatever, we'll put those in. So the bottom line is the spreadsheet from which you're going to do your meta-analysis will contain all the various tags or variables that you have pre-planned, very importantly, pre-planned to determine or to analyze. You don't go and do it after the fact. Because, if you really want to, you'll be very surprised as to what statistics will give you. Okay, cool. So that's what you would do. And then you would have in Stata or in R. Now, R is free. Stata is about 10,000 Rand a license. R is free. So sacrifice one of those Netflix series and spend a few minutes learning R. It's free, Coursera. You get a certificate at the end, and it can be used on any computer, anywhere, and you'll be able to produce these plots. So I'm going to give you the link. Please remind me to make a note of the prevalence webinar that we gave, specifically using R to produce the plots. But one way or another, the wording will be something like this. So the command in Stata is metaprop1. So meta-analysis of proportions is what that stands for. The numerator cases in over the total cases, and then you give all the characteristics you want. So we're saying there the X labels will be 0.05, 0.1, etc. We say that the label will be the study ID. We give the sizes there. The text must be 100 character, 100 points. We say we want no box, it must be a random analysis, and it must have FTT it's a transformation that takes place of the data to make sure the small studies don't give unnecessary weighting to the final synthesized result. And there you can see we can do it by, that's the overall, and then we do it by design. Remember, we had cross-sectional studies, etc. And that by design is given here in the last line here. So we're saying do all of that meta-prop analysis by design. In other words, report the results according to the study design. And in the last one, we say report the results according to the region. And it's literally that command. Seriously, if you thought it was rocket science, honestly, it's not. You learn R, it'll probably take you, I don't know, less than a week, and you'll be able to do it. Or get somebody with Stata. There's the command. I'll give you the command with pleasure. Photograph it. Some statisticians don't like to share the stuff. I'll give it to you, no problem. You can take it. That's all you need. I'll give you a template, extract the data properly in the data extraction form, have your columns, there's your command, boom, and you produce your meta-analysis. Okay, so this is about the meta-prop command, what it does, because you worry about the small studies and so on, but there you produce it. Simple. Okay, so there you can see we did it by rural versus urban versus both or not stated. And so immediately there, you can see in the top section, the combined estimate. Okay, so remember this is prevalence now, this is proportion. So we're not worried about statistical significance between one group or another because there isn't. Okay, so for proportion, here is expressed by 100 participants. And you can see here that the solid line is 0. Okay, so you can have a prevalence of none to a prevalence of 100. So we didn't go all the way to 1, it went only up to 50, because there's no studies greater than 50 that do. Oh, no, is this, yeah, am I right? Or is this 1 to 3? Let's see. My glasses on.
Yeah.
Proportion, this is proportion expressed by 100 participants, yeah. So anyway, you got the idea. So this is 1 by 100, 2 by 100, and so on. And you then have your synthesized result. And now, because you did it by area or by setting, you can compare the rural with the urban. And there's some studies that they didn't differentiate between them, so that's like an overall result, and so on. And that's what you're doing in meta-analysis. It's really is simple, simpler than you think. Here we did it by region, so in the north, it was 0.27, whereas in the south, it was 0.65, and you can see that you can get the relative contribution. Now this dotted line here takes the overall effect and just does a dotted line all the way through, just so it enables you to compare. And you can see, for example, in the east, it's completely almost beyond the mid estimate across all of the studies. But basically from this, you'll then be able to do your interpretation quite easily across, the northern region, western region, and so on. That's basically the idea there. Okay, any questions? You will decide up front how you're going to express the proportion, the synthesized result, etc. You'll decide that up front. Okay. Now, so lunch is at 1, right? 1? Okay, cool. Okay. So now when it comes to continuous data, there's also an option of standardized mean difference. So remember, continuous data are results anywhere on the continuum, and you generally compare if the intervention was effective by subtracting the one result from the other. But there are times when the studies don't measure the result in the same way. And that makes it very difficult to then compare to do a meta-analysis. So for example, it could be a pain score. Some studies may have a pain scale that's 1 to 5. Others may have a pain scale that's 1 to 10 or whatever. And that makes it very difficult to compare them in a meta-analysis. The mental health studies particularly have lots of different scales. And so of course, you want to compare which interventions are effective across the different studies, even although they measure things differently. And that's where the standardized mean difference come in. Okay, so let me go to that. Okay, so the standardized mean difference is used when the same outcome is measured in different ways. Each result is then converted to a uniform scale before combining them, and you then calculate the standardized means for each study, and then it expresses the size of the intervention effect in each study relative to the variability observed in that study. So what that basically says is, it takes the single study and it converts the result across its own variability. So a simple way to understand it is, if you had a score that was 1 to 5, and the average score was 2, you would then say it's roughly 40% in that sample. Then you had another study that was 1 to 10, and the result was 8. That's roughly 80% in that sample. So because you're bringing it down to a standardized measure, you are then able to compare it relative to each other. Of course, the biggest problem is when you back convert that data, because now how do you then have to recalculate it for each scale, depending on what scale you're using. But basically it gives that relative effect across all the studies, and it was calculated relative to the variability within each of those studies. Okay, you'll see what I mean in a second, right? So here we go. This was a study that Amir Hofeld done. He's one of our colleagues, and he looked at parenting interventions and their feeling of self-efficacy, their feeling of being able to cope with children with disability. Okay. And so you can see here that there were a number of studies done in a number of countries, and they had lots of different programs, and as you can imagine, they measured the outcome in lots of different ways. They had different coaches and trainers, and the outcome measures were different. Some used this PSOC, others used the PTC, and so on. But Amir was wanting to compare these studies to each other, and he wanted to calculate a meta-analysis to show the relative effect of each of these interventions. Okay. So as I said, it's the difference between the R groups is then divided by the standard deviation or the variability within the study. And then in the meta-analysis now, you will indicate that you're doing a standardized mean difference meta-analysis. So here you can see there was the baseline measurement, and it's a continuous data point. So therefore, you look at the mean. So the mean score was 27 with a standard deviation of 4.14. Compared to after the intervention of 29.14 with that standard deviation. And so for each of these studies, there was a measurement at baseline, a mean measurement at baseline with a standard deviation compared to a measurement after the intervention with a standard deviation. Okay, and then you can see that the standard mean difference was calculated for all of those, and then eventually they were put together in a meta-analysis at the end, and in this case you can see that the intervention was effective across all the studies. So the point is, and there's a chapter in the book for you, the point is that there are tools to allow comparisons across studies that measure things differently. That's really the point. Okay. The interpretation, as I say, we've got a webinar coming up on this. And if all of you want to be on that mailing list, so you can be when those webinars come up, that's okay. Maybe I can't say anymore if you don't want to be, let me know. But yeah, it would be, if you want to be on the mailing list, feel free, and Penny will make sure that you get, you'll get a notification of it. Okay, and then in the same way, you are able to do subgroup analysis, so parents for children older than 5 years, children younger than 5 years. Actually, I just realized, what do you do with 5-year-olds? And then you're able to look at the difference, so you can see that those parenting interventions are not statistically significant in the younger age group as opposed to the older age group. Okay, I'm gonna stop there and take conversation. I want to show you a systematic review protocol. I'm just take it off my computer. I don't know if you have any questions, because after lunch I'll speak about heterogeneity and how we deal with the differences across the studies. Okay, so I'm just going to pull off the protocol, but feel free to ask any questions. Oh, yeah.
If the diamond is crossing the line, what does that mean?
When the width of the diamond touches the line, the solid line. Yeah, so the width of the diamond is the 95% confidence interval. And so if the width of the diamond includes the line of no difference, it means that the estimated synthesized, the combined effect, is not statistically significant. So even although you have studies within the group that show statistical significance, when you bring them all together, it shows that it's not. Now, we'll talk about heterogeneity afterwards, because when that happens, you want to go and have a look at those individual studies to see if there were differences. So for example, if it was a prevalence study or an intervention study of an environmental health intervention, that may differ from country to country. So you may go in there and say, what intervention did they use? Was it the same version, the same model? Was it portable? Was it Wi-Fi? Whatever. You'd go in there and you'd do that kind of analysis.
So probably in your discussion, you explain those things.
Correct.
So people get
Correct. Yeah, absolutely correct. Okay, I just want to show you Muna's complete. Okay, are there any other questions on almost? Okay. So, okay, so I'll just take you through some of the finer points of. Okay, if I can get this to move. Okay, so if you look here, this is the search strategy that she used. So, okay, let me just go back to the beginning. I want to show you. This mouse is the trackpad is not working properly. Okay. So chapter 3 was a study protocol for the systematic review. Okay, so in her, and I'll give this to you, no problem, if you're looking at a prevalence phenomenon. So in her protocol for the prevalence of breast cancer in Africa, you can see you have the usual, your background, your objectives, your review question, and then she explains how she selected studies for, what she will do to select studies for inclusion, and then the quality appraisal of the studies, the data management, data synthesis, reporting bias, and the reporting of the review. Okay, so those are the headings that will go into your study protocol. Okay? And you'll recognize that a lot of these headings are the same headings that you will have in your final product. Okay.
There's a question, I see there's no exclusion here. So we don't have to.
So you mean the selection studies here? Yeah. So it isn't a heading here, but if you go in the further on, you'll find that she would have said. So I'll show you if I go into the. So we just have to go through all this initial part. Just see if I can get to chapter 3. There we go. Okay, so the protocol is a little bit more detailed. Now again, you don't have to reinvent the wheel. When you do the Turnitin comparison between yours and other studies, you're going to get a high Turnitin percentage. But that's because the headings are all standard. So when those come to me as a supervisor of my student, I immediately can see that things like the data will be reviewed independently by 2 people. That is going to appear a billion times on the internet. So that will have high, plagiarism index, whatever they call it. But that's okay, you just ignore those. Because the nature of systematic reviews is that we have standard wording. if everybody was going to use a different word, a different phrase, every time you read a systematic review, you'll be confused. So we have those standard headings across all of them. Okay. So the background here, you can see, again, when you read something like this, try and draw out what's the essential phrase or the essential idea coming out of it. So here she expresses the epidemiology around the world. Then she narrows it down to the African continent. Oh, man, this mouse is... Okay, you can see there she speaks about the African continent, some of the difficulties in the cancer burden, some of the difficulties in Africa, blah, blah, blah. And then she says her objective is to conduct a systematic review of studies assessing the prevalence of breast cancer on the African continent. Simple, really, really, honestly. Work package 1 of that PhD that our dear colleague is going to be doing this weekend. Okay, and then this to answer your point, here's the inclusion criteria and the exclusion criteria. So you're listed. I mean, honestly, you must admit, come on now, this is the simplest way to do a study. You put all of the parameters in front of you. I mean, it really isn't rocket science. I know that I probably can't bake a cake properly. And I know there's a whole lot of other ingredients that I don't know. But if you have the listing and you have a clear direction, you are going to bring something out that looks like a cake. Yeah, it reminds me, but you guys are all too young to share comedies, but there was a comedy called Everybody Loves Raymond.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, okay, good. Oh, and actually, in actual fact, I noticed all you young people are watching all our songs and stuff now. Yeah, Bee Gees and ABBA and all that kind of stuff. My son's been watching Friends and all of that, and even Seinfeld. But in Everybody Loves Raymond, for those of you who don't know, Marie was the daughter-in-law, and they lived opposite the mother. And Marie used to make this wonderful chocolate cake. And Deborah desperately wanted to make it to impress her husband, the son of Marie. And Marie gave her the recipe and every time it failed. And eventually one night she broke into the house opposite and discovered that Marie had purposely left off one of the ingredients. Which she would say to Deborah, you don't have love, that's why you can't make it. But meanwhile, she had left off one of the ingredients. Anyway, the point I'm making here is, if you do this protocol, you can see it's a recipe. And I won't leave out anything to make you flop. And you just have to think about it very clearly. You just have to take time to think. Yeah, in Cape Town, I was going to say, go to one of the wine farms and book a day there and just work through this slowly. Okay, so you got your inclusion criteria, exclusion criteria, the outcomes clearly listed. And of course, this is going to talk to the data extraction form. So for prevalence of breast cancer in both sexes, you are then going to need numerator, denominator, males and females. Okay? Secondary outcomes and so on. The search strategy is given. It's going to look for both published and unpublished papers with no time language restriction. They'll be included using the predefined search terms. Diagnosis of breast cancer will be based on histopathology. Make it very clear. Well defined what she's going to look for. Find an article amongst the 2,000 articles. Does it have histopathology? No, you exclude it. Don't have to make any excuses to that examiner that complains about the one study out of 600. Okay? You just clearly state that it's transparent, which is the spirit of a systematic review. Okay, and if you are going to have limitations, you say what they are, and then here she speaks about the, I think I saw critical appraisal. Okay, data management is there. And here's the critical appraisal. She used the HOI tool modified by Morphe. Explains what it is. There's a low risk, moderate risk, and so on. The stuff I showed you this morning. I feel completely confident that Eddie and I gave you a very good overview of all that you need to conduct this. And here I'm giving you now the proof that everything we told you went into this review, and by the way, she got a distinction, but that's besides the point. But this had everything you need to conduct. Okay, so there's the data extraction. Not foreign to you anymore. 2 reviews, independently extract data, study design, team created a data extraction form, piloted individually, etc. Resolved by consensus. Everything is there. Data synthesis, including assessment of heterogeneity, which I'm going to speak about after lunch, and so on and so on. And there you go. Okay. So now you go to the appendix, and here you can see a search strategy. There are examples of search strategies everywhere, people. You don't have to, get tied up on that. So there she says how she's going to find all of the participants. She's got the mesh terms, she's got the alternative terms where she's going to look. She's got not children there. I would have done it slightly differently, but yeah. Then she's got breast cancer. She's got all the terms related to breast cancer there. And it's all very nicely in a single place. Using advanced PubMed search, you can see how easy it would be. She's got the alternative terms for prevalence, and there she's got the African filter in as well. Okay. And then, this is a bonus you'll get from this. She even has the search strategy for Scopus and for Web of Science. So there are others. It's slightly different, but roughly the same, all there. You can see why she got a distinction. There's you recognize this, prevalence, critical appraisal, all there. Okay. And there she gives an example of the data extraction form. All the way through, a couple of pages, there's your study eligibility, and so on. And then if it meets the eligibility criteria, you then go and take out study characteristics, and you take out the numbers as well. Okay, and then, as Edison referred to earlier, you then present, following your search, you present all your results in this Prisma flow chart, which then tells the reader how many studies eventually made it into review and what were the reasons for them being excluded. Okay, so this is all later in, this is only the protocol, so this will be later done. Here, and let's see, so here's the meta-analysis. I'll just quickly go through this. So all of the things in the protocol are here, the primary outcomes, secondary outcomes, protocol transpose, past tense. Comprehensive search was conducted, and etc. So it's all the stuff that was there, it's already there. Says who selected the articles and so on. They speak about the numerator, denominator, overall prevalence. So everything is right there for you. And then here's that Prisma chart now filled out. So studies were excluded because they had no denominator. Prevalence was by age, prevalence by region, etc. So that's all there. You have a clear idea. If you go to the table of excluded studies, which is here, you can see exactly the reasons in a bit more detail why they were excluded. And then a bit later on, she does the risk of bias assessment for each of the various studies, each of the countries. And at a glance, you can see all the green, a couple of reds that you'd worry about. I'm going to explain to you later what we do with that. And then I just want to see, and those are your analyses, some of which I showed you. So this would be the analyses across all the studies. And then we go and we break it down into each of the regions and so on that I showed you. Yeah, so in a nutshell, that's what we do when we do a study. Yeah, this cross-section versus retrospective versus clinical trials. Excuse me. Yeah, so yeah, I'll end there. I don't know if you have any comments. I hope you're convinced that it's not as bad as you think.
There's a meta-analysis also, like a systematic review, a 3-month expiry date.
So the meta-analysis is incorporated into a systematic review, When you say 3-month expiry date, you mean it should have been done in the last 3 months? Yeah. So the meta-analysis is informed by the articles that you find. And so it's all about what articles were found. When was the database search done?
So that one doesn't necessarily apply if you haven't included article.
Yeah, no. Okay, here another question.
So that is systematic review of 3 months to you, if you have 3 months. The reason also is because if you have say your last search was 3 months ago, so maybe you will have longer than that, as long as your last search was not more than 3 months.
Yeah, so the question you're actually worried about is how long does it take to do a systematic review? Yeah, it's almost as bad as saying how long is a piece of string, but it really is about how much time you have available to do it. I mean, as I've scrolled through this thing, you can see it's actually not really difficult. It's just slogging away, setting that time aside, and just being faithful in doing it. Now, I've had even MA students who will say to me, oh, it's just so busy, whatever. I don't have Facebook, but my wife has, and I snoop on her Facebook. And then I see these folks are all on holiday in Greece and everywhere else. So which tells me your commitment to getting that thing done is not the same as your commitment to a holiday. Elijah, my sterling student that was from the Philippines, he did his in 5 months start to finish. And Elijah took time off to do it, and he worked from 8 till 5 every day on his review, and he got it done in 3 months. Because he had taken a sabbatical as a word to do it. So it really is just about moving able to do it. I can't tell you how long it's going to take you. What I can tell you is the tools are available to do it efficiently. Some people take 7 years to do a PhD, others take 3 years. I would argue that it's a combination of the commitment to doing it and finding the time, etc., but also on the guidance. I'm pretty confident that between us, we have the tools to ensure that you can do it quickly. The rest is up to you, as it were. And I always said that, you know how you always like brag, yeah, I can do it. But until Elijah came along, he proved me right. That if you have the right tools, you can do it quickly. Yeah. So I reckon 5-6 months can be done, but you're going to have to put it, and you need to get your co-reviewer not going off to Greece on holiday when it must be done. And it can be done. I'm really convinced you can do it in 6 months. You know. One always has to be so careful about the stuff that you say you can do their eyes closed. So you know my son plays guitar, right? And violin and stuff. And I always say, he's never had lessons in piano and guitar, but I always say that if he's at a wedding and the DJ doesn't rock up, that he'll be able to play. Like, father bragging. Anyway, we're at a wedding. They announced the bride and groom, and may I present your husband and wife, and they're about to walk down the aisle when there was load shedding. The whole place went dark, and Kayla played his friend and says, "Hey," and he happened to have his guitar there because he sang a solo, and then she said, "Do you know the song by Ed Sheeran?" And he said, "No, I'm sure I do." And he stood at the bottom of the aisle and he played while they marched out, otherwise they would have had no music. So I thought, okay, I can say it. It can be done. So I say with the same confidence, 6 months you can do it. Okay. I really need to have lunch. So can we take a break, yeah? Oh, I see the digital man is here. Cool. Thanks, everybody. Thanks to the folks online.
Thank you so much, everyone, again for being here today. Just before we take the photo, we're just going to break your indulgence to allow us to accommodate an item that we could have done at the end of the session, but we need to work in line with the availability of our DIT team. So we're going to be really saying a big thank you to Prof. And we just want when Prof is traveling around to Greece and to all those places he wants to travel to with Dr. M. Dr. M, if you can come down to our place. We wanted to brag with the Nelson Mandela branded item, and we actually would like you to be a good ambassador of this university anytime and anywhere you are. So we really want to say thank you so much, Prof. Honestly, your enthusiasm and expertise and your input into what ordinarily would have been scary demystified it a whole lot, and we truly appreciate that. Thank you so much. And it's no need saying that, you made it look so simple, by also allowing us to play along and identify even the figures in the diagram building and all that, ways we can see things differently. So we really appreciate all those efforts. It's not going unnoticed. And to everyone, the valued inputs and all the questions and comments, your thoughtful contributions made it more exciting. So we really want to say thank you. We cannot thank you enough, but this is a token from all of us, and on behalf of the management of the Faculty of Health Sciences, would like to say a big thank you to you, Prof. Thank you so much. And to you as well, thank you so much, Dr. M. Really appreciate it. And we also feel you can actually be in the train with the thank you so much, everyone. Please, this is not to say you will go after us. We just have our lunch and then we come back for the whole day. Can we just please take a photo of everyone with our facilitators?